The heroes of this world are known as raiders. They are individuals who hunt creatures of the shadows, and they also loot valuable treasures, besides protecting people. It's a dangerous job, but they are immortalized as heroes, and are targets of envy. This is a job that inspires people. This is what it means to be a raider. A raider's heart beats faster when they are close to death. Our story begins with some people walking peacefully in a public space, until, suddenly, they hear an argument. A boy is arguing with a man, saying he feels like a human shield. His name is Jae-hyun, and the target of his anger claims he misunderstood, adding that Jae-hyun mentioned he needed quick cash. Jae-hyun found it odd they were taking him on a raid into a dungeon. The man's name is Jong Woo-min. He works at the raider agency and acts as a broker for independent raiders like him. So, when Jae-hyun was contacted by him, he knew it would be his first job in a while, but after hearing the request, Jong wants him to stand on the front lines as a shield in a dungeon full of undead monsters. That's basically asking to be a human shield in case of danger. He asks why this is the only job available, considering kids with lower ranks than his have no trouble finding work. Jong Woo-min replies that he knows how it is. Even if you have a high rank, there are few places that request warriors. Jae-hyun asked if he's despised for being a warrior. Jong Woo-min apologizes for his grave sin, but the truth is, Jae-hyun thinks he's right. Because these days, mages are stealing the spotlight. Warriors handle things relatively slower and get hurt more often, so they aren't the first choice for clients. It's a bitter truth, compared to mages who hunt monsters safely from the rear. Warriors on the front lines received more injuries. Not to mention, in large-scale battles, mages had a clear advantage. Jae-hyun knows this. Things were different 10 years ago. There's no place left for a warrior-class raider. He soon concludes he should have chosen to be a mage. 11 years ago, in elementary school, he scored high on the aptitude test to be admitted to a special school for raider training. His aptitude for magic at the time was 97%. Seo Aina, the top mage today, only had an aptitude of 92%. At that time, one could say his aptitude was out of this world. On the other hand, Jae-hyun had only 34% aptitude for combat. But in the end, he chose combat. Jae-hyun didn't have a grand reason or anything. It's just that magic users had the worst reputation at the time. They were seen as human buff machines, unable to defeat even a low-ranking monster without a fighter. However, now fighters are in decline, while mages are idolized, and if he had chosen to be a mage, his life might be different. Typically, a raider's growth occurs at 20, so there's no reason to regret things now. Jong Woo-min tells Jae-hyun that these opportunities don't come often. He was going to give this chance to someone else but came to him first. Jae-hyun knows he had talent, envied by those who had to choose magic as a focus, but now he's just a rank D warrior. His life has taken a turn for the worse, so Jae-hyun accepts the offer. He knew from the beginning he had no choice. To survive, you can't be picky about the jobs you take. Jong Woo-min is surprised by this and says he made the right choice. He also says he'll send the location by message and will see him there at 8 o'clock. Jae-hyun asks why, as he's busy with work. He also tells Jong not to worry about it and just focus on his work. But Jong Woo-min says he has something to do there in the morning, so he'll see him there. The next day, already at the mission site, the protagonist is already prepared. He looks at his phone and says that Jong Woo-min would meet him there, but he doesn't see him anywhere, and he thinks that he should have let him know he wouldn't come. But then he thinks that, truth be told, Jong Woo-min would be much better off working with a better raider. Jae-hyun knows he's a D-rank warrior raider, while Woo-min is an A-rank mage. He has no idea why someone like that is working at a raider agency, as he could join any guild but is wasting his time. Jae-hyun thinks it would be much better if he were in Woo-min's place, but in his thoughts, his subconscious calls him useless, and he feels a bit down. However, he is then called out. A guy named Myung-ho approaches and says they've met again. Jae-hyun notices he came as well, and he says he's been having a lot of work these days. This type of job can be dangerous, but they pay a lot. The protagonist says he's right about that, and Myung-ho says there's no other place for warrior-class raiders. Kids these days don't have any love for the sword, and he asks what's so cool about throwing fireballs from the rear. However, Jae-hyun thinks it's not about love. He's actually almost starving. Anyway, Myung-ho says they should do their best again and go for a drink afterward. The protagonist says that sounds good, but deep down, he's a bit discouraged, saying he's been low on cash lately. But Myung-ho reminds him he paid last time. Jae-hyun feels a bit embarrassed, and Myung-ho notices it, so he says he can pay again this time, but it will be the last time. The protagonist says he feels bad because he's always taking advantage of his friend, but he genuinely thinks he's a naive guy. After that, a man appears and says that everyone should gather at the dungeon entrance, and he says they'll be entering in 30 minutes. Everyone there seems unmotivated, including the protagonist and his friend. Myung-ho says he thinks it's time to get ready. Jae-hyun is not into it at all. He tries to pass the time and checks his phone. When entering a dungeon, raiders need to worry about two things. The first is the possibility of encountering unexpected fortune. The fortune that comes in dungeons can dull a raider's mind and lower their guard against the dangers that come with it. While they are unable to think logically, the dungeon tests the raiders to see if what's in their hands is truly luck, or actually tragedy disguised as luck. Suddenly, Myung-ho interrupts his thoughts and asks if he's looking at his phone again. He says he always does this before entering the dungeon and asks if it's something interesting, a girlfriend's picture, or something like that. But the protagonist insists it's nothing. Yet he looks at the device again and sees a picture of himself with his mother, saying he will return safely. Then, he heads toward the dungeon. After that, they are all already inside, and they immediately encounter some zombies. Soon one of them shouts for the tanks to raise their shields and hold a straight line. He insists on the order and tells them to hold their position, even if it kills them. The protagonist thinks this is a horrible job. Meanwhile, the mages do their work and cast their spells. Soon after, magical forces begin to emerge, and the tanks hold their position. While they hold off the monsters, the magic cast by the mages destroys them. Jaehyun watches them as they die, but he looks to the side and sees the Meteor Guild, a guild of mages who were called Rising Stars for a while. For a moment he feels pleased with their presence, and thinks that if they can do this, it seems he doesn't have to worry about dying. After the battle, his friend is already drinking, and asks if the boss hall is the only place left. He also says that aging isn't easy, and if he had known it would be like this, he would have played less as a child and leveled up non-stop. The protagonist says he's still young enough and still a higher level than him. Myung-ho, anyway, asks if his friend got any good drops, as there are some good items dropping since this is an A-rank dungeon. Jaehyun isn't sure, but he's going to check now. So he does and checks the system, but something different catches his attention. He sees something he doesn't understand, and he asks, "What is this?" Right after, he feels a sharp pain in his head, wondering next, "What was that just now?" Jaehyun looks at the screen again. The Acer system alerts that it has crashed, and the protagonist finds it strange, as it's never happened before. The system also alerts that it couldn't restart due to unknown reasons. With this, the protagonist becomes even more confused. However, something emerges and tells him to follow the light. He's startled by the sudden voice. Then, the system issues a new alert. It states that an unknown presence is infiltrating the Acer system. The system tries to initiate repairs in safe mode but fails. Jaehyun grows suspicious of the unknown presence, and wonders what this voice he heard is. He recalls the voice telling him to follow the light. Myung-ho asks what he's talking about. However, the protagonist replies that it's nothing. He just thought he heard someone tell him to follow the light. But then he looks at his friend, and only sees a light around him. The protagonist becomes even more confused, wondering what this light is that wants him to follow it. Myung-ho says he's been acting strange since earlier, and asks if he's feeling sick. Jaehyun insists that he's fine, but he wonders if he's the only one seeing this light, concluding that he should go check. His friend asks where he's going. Jaehyun says it'll only take a second and that he'll be right back. In his mind, he's still unsure about what's happening. The protagonist enters the cave and follows the mysterious light. He tries to access the status window, but the system is down and hasn't returned. Jaehyun feels really frustrated by this, but he doesn't give up on accessing the information. The system alerts that a function is partially damaged and will attempt a safe mode restart. Reading this, he becomes even more confused, as he doesn't understand what's going on. He has been awakened since he was 10, but the system has never crashed in these 17 years, and there has never been a time when a function was damaged. The voice he heard makes him think it's likely related to the system crash, the invasion of an unknown presence, and the system failure. An unknown voice that sent him a message to follow the light. The Acer system might be undergoing a significant change. This Acer system is a reference to the Asgardian gods, like Thor and Odin. It was theorized that the name Acer represented humanity's last bastion of hope after being driven to the brink of extinction, 20 years before these events, referred to as the Year of Calamity, 2011. In the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, a giant tree of immeasurable height grew. It suddenly sprouted one morning, reaching beyond the skies in just 9 days. Some people called it the sign of humanity's extinction. Others called it the Tree of Blessings. The true name of this tree is Yggdrasil, the world tree that appeared in Norse mythology. And on the 9th day, after the tree had fully grown, tragedy began. Across the world, a disaster of unprecedented scale, called monsters, started to appear. Half of humanity perished to these monsters, and half of the remaining humans died from starvation or disease. It was at this moment, when everyone was consumed by despair, but someone appeared, willing to resolve the crisis. A man who did not waver in the face of chaos, challenging fearsome and powerful creatures. And at that moment, a small hope for humanity was born. The creatures attempted to attack the one who challenged them. However, the man remained unshaken. He was the first awakened one and used magic against the monsters. A human wielding the authority of the gods appeared. After this, the number of awakened individuals increased, and among them, there were those who hunted the monsters, the raiders. The Acer system is the most powerful weapon wielded by humanity's strongest heroes. Jaehyun thinks that if something big changed the Acer system, it would be hard to see it in a positive light. He finally reaches the source of the light, and stands in front of a kind of portal. Not knowing what it is, Jaehyun imagines what it might be, a portal to hidden treasures, and he rejoices at this possibility. Treasure gates are hidden halls that appear very rarely in high-class dungeons. They typically contain special items or rare ingredients, and it's said that the items from a treasure gate are worth, at the very least, thousands of dollars. At that moment, the protagonist concludes that if something of Class A or higher appears here, he could leave his current life immediately. Before entering, he clings to all deities, hoping there is a piece of Class A equipment or higher inside. Then, after this, he steps through the gate, and inside, there is a completely different environment from where he was, leaving the protagonist very surprised. He never imagined that such a large space could exist inside a dungeon, and concludes that what they said on TV wasn't urban legend after all. Jaehyun looks to the middle of the hall and sees an item, thinking that, whatever it is, this must be the item he wants. So, he decides to inspect it more closely. Then he extends his hand toward the item, and just as he's about to grab it, the system alerts that a partial recovery of system functions has succeeded, and a new piece of equipment has been acquired. After that, it asks if he would like to evaluate the acquired item. The protagonist only thinks that things are going well and the system returned at the perfect time. After this, he checks the item named Odin's Lost Eye, which, when equipped, allows the understanding of runes and the use of magic to disarm or destroy. The item is unique in the world, and when Jaehyun goes to check its status, he feels pain in his real eye. Realizing it's related to the item, he checks the system again, and the alert says that the universal derivation skill has been activated, allowing him to understand a magical formula and destroy it. The effects include full comprehension of runes, enabling all kinds of powerful magic to be used without casting and without penalties. Jaehyun knows that the highest ranked items shown in auctions are ranked S. When this item appears in an auction, it will easily exceed $10 million, as items with magical specialties basically sell for whatever price the seller wants. Not only that, but this item is of mythical rank and is still unique in the world. With this, the protagonist thinks he won't suffer anymore and won't be bound by guilds, nor will he be forced to act as a meat shield in dungeons, as his bad life is going to end. Before that, he thinks it's best to test the item first, since he believes he won't find an item like this again, and should use it at least once before selling. However, the system warns that, once used, the item is automatically bound and asks if he really wants to do this. Jaehyun panics and cancels the action immediately, thinking he almost wasted the mythical rank item that was so hard to obtain. He has no reason to equip it, and if sold on the black market, it will be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Even though he obtained a good item, he doesn't want to keep going through dungeons, because he's spent 20 years doing this, and his level can't increase anymore. Besides not being very effective if he uses it on himself, the system malfunction is an unexpected complication and can be said to be an unprecedented anomaly. However, Jaehyun is used to such troublesome complications. In today's world, where dungeons have become a reality, sudden situations happening to raiders are very common, and the situations that occur can be categorized into two different types: luck or tragedy. With this, the protagonist wonders if he should start heading back. Outside, Myung-ho tries to convince the others that the protagonist will return soon and that he just went to check something. Then, he asks the group leader to wait a bit, because Jaehyun has already returned to the spot. As soon as he returns, the leader announces they're heading into the raid soon. The protagonist apologizes for the delay, and the leader says it will be difficult if he decides to act alone, hoping this won't happen again. Apologizing, Jaehyun says it won't happen again. His friend stares at him for a moment, and notices he's acting a bit strange. Then he tries to cheer him up, telling Jaehyun not to feel down. But the protagonist, with a smile on his face, insists he's fine. He even says he'll pay for the drinks tonight, and can't be a freeloader forever. So they proceed toward the objective, and his friend is confused by the sudden change in behavior, asking if Jaehyun finally matured at 27 years old. In turn, Jaehyun thinks he got away with it for now. He knows he's in a dungeon, and since nothing that happens there will be exposed to the outside world, it becomes a lawless place. Spreading the news that he obtained a good item would be the same as asking to be killed. For him, it's no big deal to wait until the raid ends to sell the item as planned. Right now, it's more important to avoid suspicion. The leader says that now that the vanguard has gathered, he wants to return to the raid. However, an explosion occurs above them, scaring everyone, including the protagonist. He then runs to avoid being hit by the rocks. Wondering what just happened, he feels super confused by this sudden explosion. But first, he notices a purple mist. It's spreading throughout the area. He realizes this isn't something normal, but rather a type of poisonous gas that's affecting everyone present. Jaehyun knows that if he breathes it in for too long, he'll end up dead, and concludes he needs to get out of there fast. Myung-ho calls out to his friend and says they need to leave quickly because this mist seems dangerous. The protagonist says everyone needs to get out of there, but suddenly someone is hurt. When he decides to check on his friend, he notices that Myung-ho has been struck by a sword. He's very shocked, as he was caught off guard. Then, Myung-ho falls to the ground, and the protagonist is in shock at this scene. He thinks he could be next and tries to run. So, he flees as quickly as possible, without even looking back. The sudden sound of an explosion sparks thoughts in his mind. As he runs to save his life, he also thinks about the poisonous mist spreading throughout the dungeon. Jaehyun apparently finds the exit door, but he remembers his friend Myung-ho and the people who were killed. Exhausted from running, he thinks these actions don't belong to a monster. Rather, they are definitely the work of a dungeon assassin. The protagonist comes to various conclusions about this and grows very anxious about it. But for a brief moment, he thinks he should forget this for now and focus on escaping, because he doesn't want to die right after finding the magical item that could change his life. Thinking about this even makes him break into a cold sweat. However, someone is approaching from afar. Jaehyun realizes he's about to be attacked and is startled. A chain of fire is launched in his direction, but he manages to dodge the attack. As soon as he escapes it, the aggressor says he knew Jaehyun would manage to survive. When the protagonist sees him, he recognizes him as Jong Woo-min, the same agent who employs raiders. Jong Woo-min says he warned him about his visit today. The protagonist sees Jong Woo-min and asks if he's responsible for this. Jong Woo-min knows about the spreading poisonous mist and the attack on the Meteor Guild members. He laughs at the situation and confirms that he's the one behind it all. The protagonist is shocked by this confession. He tries to understand the situation first and asks Jong Woo-min's motivations. He responds that he did it because of a client's request. And there are also many people who dislike the Meteor Guild. They've been underestimating other guilds too much, and it wouldn't be surprising if people hated them. Dungeon assassin is the term used to refer to those who abuse closed dungeons and kill people inside them. According to the circumstances, the surprise attack on the Meteor Guild this time was carried out from such a blind spot. Jaehyun is concerned about this situation and wonders if he'll be able to take down his now enemy. But he quickly concludes that it won't be possible, as Woo-min is a rank A mage and one of the geniuses in the country's top 2%. The protagonist, on the other hand, knows he's only rank D, not particularly skilled or weak, just average. He's not even a target, since he's not a guild member, and is only there for support, so he concludes that he just needs to stay quiet. With the Acer system offline at the moment, there's no guarantee he can escape. It's unfair, but he has no other choice. He's overcome with a sense of helplessness as he remembers his companions. Jaehyun clearly feels a desire to avenge those who fought with him on the front line, especially his friend Myung-ho. But in reality, he can't do anything. The protagonist thinks the best course of action is to pretend that nothing happened today. He knows that, as Yggdrasil grew, the world tragically became intolerant of the weak. However, Jong Woo-min catches his attention, and then launches a fire attack in his direction. The protagonist manages to dodge this attack. Surprised that he was also targeted, he concludes that if he had reacted a little later, he would certainly have died. With a sinister smile, Jong Woo-min stares at him, and says that the target in today's dungeon wasn't just the Meteor Guild. Then, he launches more attacks, forcing the protagonist to retreat. Even without being hit directly, Jaehyun still gets injured. He thinks he needs to get out of there as quickly as possible, and wonders why he's become a target, as he's only a rank D raider. Jaehyun questions if he's done something wrong to someone, or if some powerful person wants him dead. He reconsiders his thoughts to find a conclusion, but doesn't have an answer right away. But for a brief moment, he remembers someone calling him hurtful names, also saying they didn't know how a kid like him was even conceived. Remembering this leaves Jaehyun a bit shaken. Then he realizes something from this memory, and he asks if it was his father who ordered his death. Even Jong Woo-min, who was just smiling a moment ago, changes his expression upon hearing this. He seems shocked, but his reaction doesn't last long, because soon after, he starts laughing loudly at the protagonist. Jong Woo-min says he's quite sharp, and that's why he likes him. Jaehyun looks down as he thinks about these things, precisely because memories of his past are resurfacing. Then, he wants to ask something. He remembers his mother in a morgue, and he asks if, 5 years ago, in the winter, that person also made a request like this before. Surprised, Jong Woo-min says he didn't think he would figure that one out, too. With a sarcastic smile, he says the protagonist is amazing. This reaction gives Jaehyun a partial answer. Jong Woo-min continues and says he doesn't understand, because the father had his wife murdered, and then the son was rejected. After that, he launches a new attack, but the protagonist coldly dodges the fire. Jong Woo-min says it's shocking and asks if Jaehyun doesn't agree. He says that's what happened, and he bids the protagonist farewell. But Jaehyun doesn't even move this time. He stands still and tries to say his last words. But before anything can happen, a light appears from the system. It's an item that seems to have been activated. Back in the fight, Jong Woo-min mockingly asks if the protagonist said something. He even removes his hood to hear better. But then he gets startled, as he notices something. Looking at the protagonist, he sees a strong light around him, and wonders what kind of magic this is. The ground beneath Jaehyun begins to crack, but he doesn't seem to notice, as he's lost in thought. Jong Woo-min feels the mana growing stronger, and wonders what's happening there. Something strange is going on, and he wants to end it quickly. Then he tells Jaehyun their game ends here and asks him to please die this time. Soon he unleashes his strongest attack. His fire chain approaches the protagonist, but he remains motionless, in the same spot. At the last second before being hit, he opens his eyes, and that alone is enough to stop the enemy's attack. Jong Woo-min is utterly shocked by this, as he didn't believe such a thing was possible. Jaehyun, in turn, has his injured eye replaced with a better one. The system alerts that Odin's lost eye has been equipped, and the item has been bound to the user. Jaehyun knows he can no longer sell the item, and the system alerts that he has a blank card he can use. Frustrated, Jong Woo-min shouts, saying this is impossible, as he realizes the protagonist's magic has awakened. Thus, Jaehyun moves toward his enemy, and calls him by name, saying he'll kill him in the most painful way possible. Then, the system alerts that the electric chain skill has been copied, making it possible for the protagonist to use it. Right after, he turns the tables on his opponent, summoning multiple chains. Jong Woo-min panics and asks how he did that. Since it took him years to master that magic, a D-rank warrior shouldn't be able to use it so easily. He says he doesn't understand how the protagonist could use such a high-level spell and asks if his opponent thinks this will be enough to defeat him. Jaehyun replies that he doesn't know the answer, but he'll find out right now. Then he attacks his enemy. Jong Woo-min manages to dodge a few chains, but the attacks come from all directions. The protagonist is toying with his prey, and attacks his opponent indirectly, making him run. In anger, Jong Woo-min tries to counterattack. Once again with his chains, he fights. But then, the protagonist's system alerts that the universal derivation skill has been activated. In this way, he directs the enemy's chain back at him. Seeing his own ability used against him, Jong Woo-min freezes in fear. Realizing he'll die if he does nothing, he decides to summon a shield. With his new magical eye, the protagonist activates universal derivation again, and Jong Woo-min's shield shatters, making it impossible to dodge the attack. Then he is hit directly. With the battle already won, the protagonist approaches his defeated enemy, and sees that, although weakened, he's still alive. Jong Woo-min didn't expect this outcome, and now he begs for his life. However, without saying a word, the protagonist finishes him off in one strike. After that, he's overwhelmed by a strange feeling, and asks himself if it's really over. Then he lies down on the ground beside his enemy's body. His stamina and magic are depleted, and there's nothing left in him. He just obtained a mythical item, and thinks he's going to die next, as if his luck decided to show up only now. Death, a terrifying word he's had to face many times while working as a raider. But now that he's facing it for real, he realizes that the feeling of dying is so cold. Then, the system alerts him that a new operating system has been downloaded, and asks if the protagonist would like to start it, stating that once the new system starts, time will return to the period the user most desires. Jaehyun realizes this is about regression, and asks if the system will save him. Another variable has appeared for him. Jaehyun doesn't know whether happiness or sadness awaits him at the end of this journey, but he decides to start the new system, because this is the only decision he can make now, and he has no other choice. A new message appears, saying that the new operating system Nornir has started. After that, he sees some images he doesn't fully understand, along with a different language. Some girls are talking to each other, but what they say is incomprehensible. However, they seem to be happy about something. One of them even reaches out her hand to the protagonist. As soon as he takes her hand, the system alerts that from now on, he is the adversary of the almighty Acer, and the passive skill, observed by the gods, has been acquired, along with the divine eye skill, meaning the gods opposing the Acer are watching him. And then Jaehyun wakes up in a bed. He gets up, still startled, then looks around the place. Without fully understanding what's happening, he realizes the place is familiar. Looking at his hands, he notices there's nothing wrong. But then, his previous power manifests, and the system informs that the temporal regression to the time most desired by the user was successful. Reading this, The protagonist wonders if he's dreaming or something. He recalls his past and asks if he really returned to the past. But he concludes no, this must just be a dream. He remembers the last moments with his mother, saying that this is one long dream. But surprisingly, she walks into the house, and as soon as the protagonist sees her, he runs to her and embraces her. He concludes that if this is a dream, he never wants to wake up. Moments later, the system alerts that the date is November 15th, 2020, and the user has successfully returned to the most desired period. The limitations on non-combat activities have been removed, and his body has successfully recovered to 20%. Jaehyun still questions the reality around him, but realizes he's in his room in his old house. A new side quest, Rest is a Friend of Success, has been automatically created. The system states that he is a being who miraculously survived death, and as a requirement, it asks him to rest to recover his health to 80%. After reading this, the protagonist thinks he will return to the beginning. First of all, he knows he didn't die in his last fight, and the reason is probably because of the new system, allowing him to return to the past. His mind is already used to the appearance of Yggdrasil and monsters. It's not the first time he's faced these strange things. And if there's one thing he's learned in situations like this, it's that judging and adapting quickly to the environment is more than essential. If the system's information is correct, this day is 11 years in the past, when he was in the 3rd year of elementary school. He also realizes that the name of the new system is Norner. But honestly, he thinks this thing about going back in time really feels like a dream. However, he's gradually getting used to it, and after checking his calendar, he notices one thing is certain. Jaehyun sees a reminder on the calendar, saying that he must write his application for the Miller's Academy and be a combat class, no matter what. Then, he picks up a pen and rewrites the previous reminder, saying this is a new and precious opportunity, one where he won't make the same mistake twice, as he will be a mage in this life. After that, he sits down to eat, and after tasting the food, he starts crying with emotion. His mother sees him like this, and doesn't understand this behavior, wondering if something has been worrying him lately, because he's usually so quiet, and now he's been crying so much. The mother then tries to talk to him, asking if something is wrong, but Jaehyun replies that it's nothing. He just had a nightmare. He remembers his past, and feels distressed about it. Soon he says he needs to tell his mother something. She says she noticed and thinks he must be afraid of applying to Miller's Academy. The mother isn't surprised, as she knows being a raider is a very dangerous job, besides being highly competitive. And if he doesn't want to, she thinks she should make him quit and go to a regular school. But Jaehyun only says he wants to change his application to mage. With this answer, his mother feels more at ease. She remembers how her son had been fixated on applying as a warrior from day one, and he's so considerate of others, so Jaehyun wouldn't say something like that just because he was influenced by the moment. His mother is worried about him, and looking directly into his eyes, she asks if he's not doing this impulsively, but Jaehyun replies that he's not and that he's been thinking about it for a long time. His mother says it's all right and he's free to do whatever he wants, and she says she just hopes he doesn't give in to money. Whether it's magic or something else, he'll always have his mother's support. Jaehyun feels moved but thinks now isn't the time to cry, because if he wants revenge on his father, an A-rank raider, he'll have to get much stronger. Then, the system alerts that he has completed the rest mission and obtained a blank card as a reward. Jaehyun wastes no time and begins to train, thinking the situation is favorable for him. He still doesn't fully understand what the Norner system is, but it's worth taking advantage of it for now, as he has knowledge of the future, and knows about hidden pieces and ruins he can monopolize, having a good enough memory to even serve as a map in dungeons. His problem is his abilities. Except for those learned in the last fight, all he has are warrior class skills. Jaehyun thinks it's no surprise since he planned to be a warrior class from the start. He wonders if there's nothing he can do. Then he decides to check his status and notices that his level has returned to what it was back then, and his attributes have also returned. Jaehyun wonders why only the passive skills are the same. The system says that due to the skill, those observed by the gods, all previous passive skills have been retained, and it says this skill aids in the user's rapid growth with the god's blessing. He realizes this skill affects all attributes and is surprised. More importantly, it's the attention of the gods opposed to the Acer, and he concludes he should look at his other skills as well. The system shows the absolute god's eye skill, which sees through illusions, revealing absolute reality. Then, it shows lightning chain, which attacks the enemy and has a chance to inflict paralysis status on the struck enemy. Jaehyun isn't sure yet what this absolute god's eye does, but he thinks the lightning chain is really good. Regarding his attributes, he thinks strength isn't necessary for mages, but he needs at least some agility to be able to dodge. Magic is obviously necessary, but the most important thing is endurance, because endurance doesn't increase attack power like strength or magic, but it reduces fatigue speed in repetitive actions. If he raises it first, he'll notice a significant change as he levels up. He's already taken care of the first priority. Now, the important thing is to choose the skills he'll learn. His attack skills are fine. Besides, even if he tries to learn high-rank spells, he won't be able to use them since he lacks mana, and perhaps what he's missing is a healing spell. Currently, it's 2020, and mage classes are considered trash compared to warrior classes. However, raiders with healing skills are exceptions. They are treated as nobility wherever they are, because even without becoming raiders, they can work in the medical field, so they're well regarded. Jaehyun concludes that if he starts with a healing skill, at least he won't be looked down upon everywhere. But the problem is that finding an awakened one with a healing skill isn't so easy. Above that, it couldn't be avoided with Woomin. However, later on, he'll need to start using the blank cards as efficiently as possible. He doesn't know how many cards the system will provide, but it's unlikely he'll get an incredible item that disrupts the balance. Jaehyun asks if there isn't an option like that somewhere. Then, his phone rings, and he becomes curious. He picks up the phone to check. Surprised by what he sees, he received a notification from Kim Yi-young. She's a childhood friend of the protagonist. They live nearby, so they were always together. The girl was his best friend and always dreamed of attending Milas with him, but her end wasn't a happy one. She died in the protagonist's arms. Remembering this makes him very uncomfortable. However, he tries to keep his head in place, and thinks he can change her story this time. Or rather, he needs to change it. When he reaches the messages, he thinks she's exactly as he remembers. Then, he says there she is, Saint Yusung, and the magic that represented her, sacrifice. Jaehyun stands up and says he doesn't have to worry about a big fish like her. Feeling good, he decides to go out. He informs his mother, and she tells him not to come back too late. The protagonist is happy to be able to reunite with his friend, and lets her know he's on his way. Elsewhere, Yusung's driver goes over the day's schedule, mentioning that soon she'll be giving a motivational speech on the city stage. After that, the rank B dungeon near Songbuk district. Then, after an inspection at the station base in Wonju, they'll head to America. He asks if Yusung will be alright in her current state, as she looks paler than usual. The woman replies she's fine, just feeling a bit tired. The driver comments that it's because of the extreme routine she's kept up in recent months. He also notes that she knows very well that the sacrifice is consuming her life force. He adds that it would be great if there were at least one other person with a healing skill at the level of sacrifice, as they could help treat her. However, Yusung says they agreed not to talk about it. Sung Jae is worried about her, and thinks that if this continues, it won't end well. She's become the saint of Korea, but she may crumble soon. Kim Yi-young is already with the protagonist and hurries him along, as there are many people in front of them. Jaehyun says he knows that, and asks her not to drag him. The girl stops for a moment, and the protagonist says she only called him because she was afraid of getting lost. However, she says that's not it, and he should stop assuming things. Then, he asks Kim Yi-young to let go of his hand, but the girl holds on tighter. Hyuk remarks that for someone so amazing in studies and sports, she always causes a stir because she has trouble finding the right way. Kim Yi-young says that thanks to her, Jaehyun can watch the speech and everything else. He thinks that's true, and as long as he can copy the saint's sacrifice skill, it will be of great help in the future, and he might even profit by establishing stronger connections throughout South Korea. They sit down to listen to the speech, and Kim Yi-young seems very excited. The protagonist, however, is focused on something else. Signs scattered around the place. They say positive things about the Saint of Korea and that she can save people through healing magic. Saint Yusung was a revered healer, well known not only in the country but around the world. When working as a raider wasn't common, she was the person who tried to protect the citizens before anyone else. But the protagonist is suspicious of her intentions. Yusung steps onto the stage and says hello to everyone, introducing herself as Yusung-eun. Jaehyun seems to be the only one not excited by her presence, because he knows that in 2 months, Yusung will reach a critical condition during the raid at the dungeon in 81. The cause was none other than her healing spell, called Sacrifice, and he knows there's only one way to save the saint. Meanwhile, his friend is overly excited about the speech and cheers loudly. Jaehyun says the saint will be startled at this rate. In her speech, Yusung mentions that the current world is going through an unprecedented disaster period. Yggdrasil, countless lives were lost after its appearance, and the emergence of monsters. But with it came the awakened. And thanks to raiders over the past few years, the situation has improved a little. However, among the current awakened, only 20% volunteered to become raiders. Despite the fact that the death toll is growing exponentially, the world, as it always has been, is at a crossroads between life and death. Even now, countless innocents are perishing. What Yusung wants to say in front of everyone is that they need to have courage. To all the awakened ones out there, their courage can change the world. She asks everyone to please become raiders and make the world a better place. In this way, the world might become a better place someday, and the Yanoa Guild, and she will help make that a reality. With this speech, Yu Sung concludes the talk, and from the audience, Kim Young says that the saint is a good speaker, as expected. The protagonist agrees. Most awakened ones don't want to become raiders, as it's not easy to fight monsters on the front lines. Jaehyun thinks that even he, before returning, wanted to sell items and live a free and carefree life. Kim Young says that, as she thought, the saint is more than qualified to be her hero, but Jaehyun says he doesn't think she'd want to be qualified for that. Her friend tells him not to ruin the moment. The protagonist apologizes and says he has some things to take care of, so he'll leave first. Kim Young asks if he's going to leave her alone. Jaehyun says that she herself mentioned she wasn't dyslexic. Annoyed, she asks if her friend also bullies people at school, but he says he's just joking and that he called her mother a moment ago, and she'll arrive soon, so she just needs to wait. Kim Young says they should go back together in her mom's car and asks if he really has something urgent to do. Jaehyun says he forgot to mention earlier, and reveals that he changed his class to mage, and asks his friend to teach him some magic later, starting with the fundamentals of theory. She says that's easy, but she wants to know why he changed classes and says he shouldn't reveal that and then leave. She calls him heartless and asks if he'll really leave her alone like this. In another moment, the protagonist is looking for someone. Then he sees a man near a car, with a satisfied smile. The man is talking on the phone, and the protagonist approaches. He hangs up and sees him approaching. He quickly apologizes but says that if it's a fan gift for Yu Sung, now isn't a good time. However, the protagonist says he's there to meet the guild master. Her driver thinks the protagonist is just another fan crazy about this raider stuff. Then he tells the boy to pay attention, stating that no matter how much he likes the saint, he can't just show up like this out of nowhere, and that if he acts this way, Master Yu Sung will get suspicious. But the protagonist says he didn't come because of that. He states that he knows she has an incurable illness. The driver is surprised by this, and right after, Jaehyun talks about a way to cure this illness. Sung Jae becomes furious with him, asking where the protagonist heard that, and how he knows she's sick. Jaehyun says it's not cool to be yelling about it like an idiot. The saint, who was inside the car, tells Sung Jae to wait a moment. Then, she asks the protagonist if he can really take responsibility for what he said. He says yes, affirming that he can cure her illness. Yu Sung thinks that if he were lying, he'd be caught in seconds, but he seems so confident about it, and she wonders if he has something to support that confidence. She asks the driver how many hours are left until the next event. He replies 2 hours. For now, she says the protagonist can come in and wants to go somewhere quieter, as there are many onlookers here. Upon arriving at a more private spot, she tells the protagonist to sit. He sits down and thanks her. Yu Sung then says one thing at a time, and asks how he found out about her illness. Jaehyun says he's sorry, but that's something he can't share. If she really wants to hear it, he might even tell. But if he does, he won't be able to cure her anymore. Yu Sung calls him a brave boy and says it's fine. For her next question, she asks how he plans to cure her. Being quite honest, Jaehyun replies that he plans to copy her sacrifice. Yu Sung is a bit confused. Sung Jae gets irritated with the protagonist, and says there's no point in listening any further. He asks if the protagonist has any idea of the kind of skill that sacrifice is to make such a claim. He adds that it's the guild master's unique skill, and not even they have a way to copy this magic, asking how the protagonist thinks he'll do it. Unique skills are ranked higher than top-ranked skills, those of S rank. By hereditary succession or a unique individual, those are the only 2 ways to obtain it. While other normal abilities can be memorized through a formula, there is no such thing for unique abilities. They are monopolized by powerful people, or at least that's the common perception of normal society. Then, the protagonist asks the man to calm down, as, if he couldn't do that, he wouldn't have even come with them in the first place. Sung Jae gets extremely nervous about this situation, but Yu Sung says they can decide after hearing him out. The saint asks if the protagonist is saying he will heal her using his own sacrifice. Jaehyun says yes, to heal wounds caused by a penalty from an ability. Another ability of the same rank or higher is required, but since there is no ability ranked higher than unique, and she cannot heal herself, this is the best method. The inherent principle of Yu Sung's ability was, as the name suggests, sacrifice, and offering to the gods. Because of this, Yu Sung has the restriction of being unable to heal herself, as it would conflict with the concept of sacrificing another's life force to heal. The protagonist says that if she is willing to continue, he'd like to start right away. She agrees and asks him to prove it. Sung Jae still hasn't approved of this idea. However, the guild master uses her ability anyway. Jaehyun judges this as excellent. Then he activates his system, and pulls out a blank card he had kept. The system alerts that a new ability can be acquired and asks if he wishes to record the sacrifice on the blank card. He confirms, and the system alerts that the recording is complete. Jaehyun is pleased that it worked, and says he thinks they don't trust him, so he must first earn the trust of both. Then, he uses the sacrifice ability card. The two are quite surprised. After demonstrating his power, he asks if they can begin negotiations now. The system created the ability card perfectly. Seeing this, the protagonist concludes he has what he needs, and the saint asks what he wants from her guild. She thinks that just the fact that he can cure her illness would be enough to want to negotiate. But to her, the protagonist looks like someone who has just entered high school. She can't believe that someone so young can suggest negotiations while standing in front of Guild Master Yanoa, and she becomes intrigued. Jaehyun asks her to please be his sponsor. She asks if the protagonist needs help to evolve as a raider. He replies yes, and he has big dreams. But for that, he needs money, connections, and other things. Therefore, at times like this, he would like his guild to support him. Yu-sung says that if he has the courage to do something like this, she knows he's worth the investment. She also says he has talent. However, the saint also has her own interests, and says she has a condition to help him. Jaehyun notices that, even though the situation is likely desperate, and he may be her only hope for healing, she hasn't lost her composure. He thinks it might be because she's the guild master. Yu-sung says that, as he already knows, her illness is a personal issue and has nothing to do with her guild. However, what he desires is not just her help, but the help of the entire guild. The protagonist understands that she's trying to say it's not an equivalent exchange, and says he'll make his decision after hearing her condition. He thinks that, in any case, she's the one who will suffer if she's not healed, not him. Besides, Yu-sung wouldn't make a meaningless condition in this situation. After this, Yu-sung asks if he has a guild he wants to join. Jaehyun is confused by the question, and thinks Yu-sung is trying to recruit him. He asks if she's serious. Yu-sung confirms that she is, and that she's not someone who would joke about this. She says she has a few reasons for asking this. First, there's the fact that he discovered the secret of her illness. This is classified information, known only to a few people, suggesting that his investigative skills are quite high. Although the protagonist only knows this because of his time travel, he can't say that now. Secondly, Yu-sung says he perfectly copied her unique ability, and she's never heard of anyone being able to do something like that, and she doesn't know if there will be others in the future, wondering how many more abilities he can copy. With endless possibilities, Jaehyun feels embarrassed and asks if there's a third condition. She says yes, and it's the most important one, saying that even though she's right in front of him, he's not showing even a hint of nervousness. Someone so young who doesn't get nervous in front of the guild master Yanoa. They're really quite an interesting person. Soon, she asks if this is reason enough to recruit him. In her past, after Yu-sung was left in a critical condition, her guild collapsed for unknown reasons, but now it's number one. If Jaehyun joins her guild now, she's sure he'll gain respect and receive good treatment while working, if he really wants to grow. After that, he asks if it isn't illegal to make a contract between a guild and a student who isn't yet a real adult. The guild master just smiles, and asks if he's heard of priority negotiation rights. The protagonist knows that this right allows a guild to sponsor the growth of cadet raiders who aren't yet adults. And once they reach adulthood, when it's time to sign a contract, the guild has priority over others. It's usually an offer available only to geniuses, so the protagonist didn't imagine he'd ever be one of them. Because before he returned, even the lowest-ranking guilds had rejected him. Yu-sung thinks he has a childish side that makes him cute, and says they'll send a contract to his house, and he should think carefully before deciding. Jaehyun says he wants to heal her first. He knows this is certainly a good opportunity, but he doesn't need to decide now and wants to focus on the healing first. It won't be too late to consider his next step afterward, so he decides to begin the healing process. While he performs the procedure, Sung-jae stares at him suspiciously, because he can't understand what's happening. He recalls what he saw earlier, and he no longer doubts the protagonist's abilities, but he knows that many before him had offered to cure the guild master's illness. It was a disease that even those who dedicated their whole lives to healing couldn't cure. Precisely because it wasn't an easy thing to do, the protagonist's system alerts him that the sacrifice skill has been activated, and a wave of healing magic flows through his body. As a result, Yu-sung already begins to feel the effects. Even her loyal assistant notices that she's actually being healed, and he's impressed by this event, as if he's truly witnessing a miracle. After that, he apologizes for his previous behavior and asks the protagonist to take good care of his master. Jaehyun says it's okay and that he wouldn't believe his words in his position either. Sung-jae insists that he wants to apologize properly later. The system alerts the protagonist, informing him that the healing of the marked person was successful, and the first aid skill leveled up to 19. As soon as he finishes the procedure, he asks Yu-sung to try moving. She slowly stands up and walks toward the sunlight streaming through the window. She reaches her hands out, trying to touch some butterflies. With that, she cries with emotion, for her symptoms have disappeared. She thanks him afterward, but asks if Jaehyun won't receive a penalty for this. However, He knows that the system indicated a skill copied by consuming a blank card does not apply penalties, and he tells her to relax, adding jokingly that if it happens she can heal him. Yu-sung says yes, as many times as necessary. After that, she hands him her card and promises to do her best to meet his demands, and that she'll be available whenever he needs. She also tells him to view the contract they mentioned earlier in a positive light. Jae-hyun takes her business card, and says that before he leaves, there's one more thing he wants. The day after that meeting, Yu-sung's car stops at a location, and her driver opens the door. The protagonist steps out of the vehicle, well-dressed and elegant. He arrives at a place he recognizes, the low-rank dungeon belonging to the Yanoe Guild. He knows that Milla's Academy is a place where geniuses gather to compete, and if he wants to survive in such a place, he has to level up. In front of the dungeon, Sung-jae says he prepared the healing items and simple tools that will be necessary to raid the dungeon. Regarding the protagonist's equipment, he says the guild will lend some items that he can use for now. Jae-hyun picks up a magic staff and thanks the guild. Sung-jae says he'll be fine, and it may be an E-rank dungeon, but entering any dungeon alone is dangerous. He asks if there's a reason for the protagonist to go alone. Jae-hyun replies that he just wants to level up a bit. With that, Sung-jae accesses his system and retrieves an item, saying that, for Jae-hyun, it will be safer if he takes this as well. The protagonist knows this is a teleportation stone, and Sung-jae says that if he breaks it, he will return to the guild's entrance instantly, so he should use it in times of danger. He insists the protagonist take the item, saying it's an apology for having been rude to him, and also a token of gratitude for healing his master, saying he'd like him to accept it. The protagonist accepts the gesture and thanks him. He thinks that the magical power he's sensing is clearly from an E-rank dungeon, concluding that there shouldn't be any issues. Sung-jae insists that he doesn't forget to use the stone if anything happens inside the dungeon. Then, he enters the dungeon, and his system issues an alert. The protagonist is startled as there is an abrupt change of scenery. He asks what is happening, and his system alerts that, due to the Norner system, the user is being teleported to a specific area, Helheim, the land of the dead. Far away, the guild master rests in her office. However, she is concerned about the protagonist, wondering if he'll be alright inside the dungeon. She recalls that his request was to be taken to a low-rank dungeon and that he wanted to enter it alone. Even though it's an E-rank dungeon, for a raider candidate to complete a dungeon alone is almost impossible. He has extreme talent, but he's still a rough diamond. She thinks the protagonist doesn't realize this, and even so, he asks to enter alone, which makes her intrigued, wondering what kind of plan he has. Suddenly, someone knocks on her door, introducing herself as Park Hannah. The guild master then lets her in. The girl enters the office, and Yu-sung asks if she has what was requested. Park Hannah says yes, handing over the protagonist's profile. The master takes it and thanks her. For Hannah, it's rare for the master to personally observe someone. She must have already noticed what makes the protagonist a special boy. While the girl thinks this, Yu-sung reads the file she brought, and realizes that the protagonist is applying as a warrior class, but wonders how he can use magic. The two sigh, as they don't know the answer. Yu-sung continues reading the file, and becomes increasingly intrigued by the protagonist. After some time reading the information, she asks her secretary if everything is correct. Hannah replies that, unless it's a machine error, everything is certainly correct. Some of the information is indeed impressive. Then Yu-sung makes a phone call, and tells Sung-jae to pass a message to the protagonist as soon as he's out, that she's available whenever he is, so she'd like to have a meeting with him. Sung-jae doesn't quite understand why, but the guild master says she wants to personally check the talent the boy has. Back in the dungeon, the protagonist is being teleported by the system. A little while later, he falls. The height was considerable, and he feels the pain from the impact. When he gets up, he realizes he's in some kind of graveyard. The place is covered by a strange fog, and, as he breathes in, he ends up coughing. Jae-hyun feels very uncomfortable, and wonders what is going on. However, he sees something in the distance, what looks like an armed undead, pointing a bow and arrow in his direction. The arrow fired approaches Jae-hyun, and before he realizes it, he is grazed by it, managing to dodge at the last second, avoiding a more serious impact. Thus, he gets a better look at the enemy. The walking skeleton doesn't give up, and prepares to attack again. The protagonist wonders if this is paralysis poison? This could be a problem if he didn't have the sacrifice ability. Then, a few undead start to rise, and around the area, a dark energy appears, making the protagonist a little worried. The undead advance toward him, and also attack from a distance. But the protagonist's reflexes are sharp, and he manages to catch one of the arrows in his hand. Elsewhere, we see Kim Young at her house. She's still upset with the protagonist for leaving her alone, saying that this time she won't let it slide, because even though he knows she gets a little lost, he still left her behind. She's irritated, as he even went with her to the lecture and then did something like this. She even says that these kids nowadays are all the same. She remembers that he once said he hated crowded places, and out of nowhere changed his mind and wanted to go to the lecture. The guy who is usually nice enough to take her places just left her standing there, and the worst part was him saying he would change his application to become a mage. After all, he always trained like crazy to become a warrior raider, so if there's a reason he made this switch, it was more than enough for him to throw away all his training. Besides, it's hard to explain since he's usually very cautious. Even when they go out to eat, he's so indecisive that it takes him 10 minutes to decide what he wants. But suddenly, he changed overnight. Kim Yoon grabs her phone and sends furious messages to the protagonist for abandoning her, demanding an explanation. Speaking of the protagonist, he's still in the dungeon. He feels a threatening presence coming from somewhere, possibly attracted by the monsters. 4 apparitions, each one unique. They are Draug or skeleton soldiers. Jaehyun mentions that this team is better than many he's seen out there, and rhetorically asks if they want him to win alone. He thinks it's a good thing he brought a magic staff with him. This item is a staff created by a blacksmith affiliated with the Manhwa guild. With it, the protagonist prepares to attack. He knows that Helheim is one of the 9 worlds in Norse mythology, and that this world is ruled by Loki's daughter, Hel, the queen of the land of the dead. The dungeons were formed after the 7 worlds, excluding Midgard and Asgard, the world of snow, Niflheim, the world of fire, Muspelheim, the world of giants, Jotunheim, the world of elves, Alfheim, the world of dark elves, Svartalfheim, the world of the Vanir gods, Vanaheim, and located in the deepest, coldest part of Niflheim lies another world, Helheim. Helheim is a very difficult place for a novice to raid without divine power. The fear of facing enemies who return to life after being killed is indescribable. But for the protagonist, this is a good thing. If it's really Helheim, it'll be perfect to test his new skills. The sacrifice skill is initially a healing skill. It's a powerful area skill that, when used against undead, turns into an attack skill called Judgment of Light. With this in mind, the protagonist faces the undead, who, though they attack him constantly, don't pose much risk to him, being easily defeated by his magic staff. Not only that, but Jaehyun plans to rely on a wide area skill. With this, he trains his area skill, and by killing 1 apparition, the system alerts him that he's gained experience points. This alone doesn't satisfy him, so he attacks the enemies more intensely, not giving them any chance to fight back. Now, Jaehyun has no experience fighting as a mage, but this doesn't stop him from training with what he already has. With this, he kills 2 more apparitions and gains 140 experience points. After these XP gains, he thinks he can't miss such an opportunity, and with all this experience, his current level is already more than enough. Then he attacks another creature, but this time, the apparition was a bit more resilient than usual, and his magic staff breaks. He killed the skeleton soldier, but he lost his weapon. Now, without anything to fight with, Jaehyun tries to think of another alternative. Pausing to think, he wonders how a mage fights, because until now, he's only fought like a warrior. Then he realizes it's not the time to relax and just keep gaining experience points, especially since he broke his weapon out of his own recklessness. But this isn't the end of the world for him. The end result hasn't changed that much. Next, he activates the sacrifice skill, and a strong light appears from the sky. The system detected the existence of an undead, and sacrifice turned into an attack skill. Along with this, the Judgment of Light skill was activated, allowing him to kill a Draugr and gain 100 experience points. With each apparition he kills, experience points are acquired, and his level keeps increasing. After resting a bit, his stamina was restored. Jaehyun had thought this would be difficult, but if he hadn't leveled up now, he'd be in trouble. He wonders if the Judgment of Light skill is rank S. If copying a skill onto a blank card means it is. There are some tricks to fighting as a mage. Without them, he might not fare well next time. Moreover, he realizes that this place is a summoning dungeon, and there's no way the guild would have left him there without checking this first, concluding that it can only be the Norner system's fault. Now that he's fought enough, he considers using the teleport stone. But before doing so, he senses a dark aura hovering around, and it gives him chills. It's a terrifying mana. The protagonist realizes that something might be approaching and stands ready. However, his nervousness only increases, making him feel sick and short of breath. In his mind, he wonders what might be approaching, but one thing he's sure of: if he doesn't move now, he will die. So he stabs his own leg, to force his body to react. He knows he can't make any noise, as there's something nearby, and he has to do something discreetly. Suddenly, the dark entity approaches, and Jaehyun realizes it's a shadow. He was caught off guard by this. His system alerts that the boss knight shadow has appeared and that the level difference compared to the user is dangerously high. The system also warns him to escape the dungeon, and the protagonist knows he can't fight this. Thus, he tries to activate his inventory, but quickly and silently, the shadow closes in on him. Jaehyun manages to access his inventory and grab the teleportation stone. However, before he could use it, the shadow attacks him, throwing him far away. His stone falls, and he doesn't even see where. After being hit, the system alerts that his HP level is critical. So, he must use a recovery item immediately. As the shadow approaches, Jaehyun can barely move. He tries to react, but he can't. His enemy seems merciless and prepares an attack. The protagonist thinks he won't be able to dodge this, so he simply closes his eyes, awaiting death. But he notices something strange and decides to look. When he sees the shadow again, he realizes its movements have stopped. Suddenly, someone approaches and says they can't allow this. They add that the child is an important guest. After all, they personally brought him to this place. As the figure approaches the protagonist, they say that he is the child who bears the fate of the adversary. As soon as the mysterious creature appears, the protagonist wonders who she is, and asks himself if she was the one who paralyzed the shadow. The female creature merely states that the protagonist is the adversary destined to kill it, but says he is merely a child with a normal physique. His magic and mana are good, but not enough to face Acer, and she questions why Loki chose a child as the adversary. The protagonist feels weak from blood loss, and thinks he's going to pass out. He wonders if this is his end. However, he thinks that if he dies here, all his plans will go to waste. His desire for revenge and his ambition to become a successful mage can't end like this. He feels he needs to endure and find a way to escape. The woman stares into his eyes and says she likes what she sees, but she says he is still a weak child, and Ragnarok is closer than he can imagine, so he'll have to become stronger soon. If he can't and returns to hell, she declares that she will come after him to kill him. The protagonist is confused, but she says he is an important being to them, so she'll give him a chance to grow stronger. She tells him to become stronger and defeat the shadow in front of him. If he succeeds, she will give him a special gift, but as she mentioned before, he doesn't have much time. With that, the protagonist's system alerts him about a new main quest, Hell's Trial. She says he has 2 months to defeat the shadow. The reward for the mission is Hell's Gift. After this, she moves away from the protagonist, but this doesn't stop him from feeling scared. Before leaving, she says that if he fails to show progress in that time, he will die by her hands, and she wishes him success in his battle. The protagonist recalls the moment he accepted the Norner system. Then he wakes up feeling dizzy, realizing he is no longer in the dungeon, but outside. He gets up from the ground, but feels pain in his abdomen. His system is still a bit scrambled. However, he remembers the new main quest, Hel, the goddess of death who rules Helheim, one of the 9 realms. The protagonist realizes he has met a goddess, and remembers that she mentioned something about him being destined to be someone's adversary. She even hinted that he might have been chosen by Loki himself. He thinks about this for a while, and even after obtaining the Norner system, he had heard something similar, and his system alerts that from now on, he is the adversary of the high and mighty Acer. Everything is very uncertain. He wonders why he was able to return and what Hel truly wants from him. Jaehyun is only sure of one thing, that he needs to get stronger as soon as possible, because if everything she said is true, the moment he stops, without a doubt, Hel will kill him. Defeating a night shadow in 2 months is no easy task, but it's good to have a goal like that. Things aren't looking good, and his entire basic fighting style is a problem. He's not used to fighting as a mage and hasn't even learned low-rank skills. To improve at this, there's nothing better than starting from the basics. Next, he decides to contact the guild master, but he sees that Sung Jae has sent several messages, saying that the guild master wishes to see him and would like to hear his thoughts on the contract, asking if he would be available. Thinking of her, the message arrives, so he replies, saying that he has positive thoughts about the contract. The protagonist gives a smile that suggests he's planning something, and says in the message that he'd like to add one more thing to the contract. The next day, he goes to the meeting. Upon arriving at the guild's company, Sung Jae greets him and escorts him to the master. Jaehyun thinks that the reasons they called him were probably because they saw his awakened stats and his 97 aptitude for magic. Because worldwide, few have this talent, and the reason he became a warrior despite not being that strong was due to his indecision. Everyone he knew, even people on TV, would pray to God because they wanted to be warriors and look down on mages. So there was no reason for him to follow a different path. Thinking about this gives him a headache, but soon he arrives at the master. When he realizes where he is, he's surprised. Yu-sung is happy that he has arrived, and welcomes him with a smile, saying she's been waiting for him. The protagonist says it's good to see the guild master. Yu-sung asks what he thought of the contract and the terms. Jaehyun replies that they're excellent. A monthly living allowance, an infinite supply of rank B items from the guild, for free, and the reward split is favorable to the protagonist. He knows contracts like this are only offered to rank A or higher, and before signing, he wants to propose one more condition to the guild master. Yu-sung asks what that would be. He says, assuming she already knows his profile, stating that it hasn't even been a month since he switched his registration from warrior to mage. So, he still doesn't know much about spells. So his condition is that Guild Master Yu-sung becomes his magic teacher. The first rule of surviving as a raider is to have the best cards and use them at the right time. Sung Jae had the same thought when they first met, concluding that the protagonist is truly someone special. Yu-sung is the master of Manhwa and one of the only rank S raiders in the world. Just thinking that she could teach someone is already surprising. Jaehyun says that if she agrees to this condition, he will sign the priority negotiation contract with the Manhwa Guild. The master says it's an interesting proposal, and then accepts the proposal, because she's also interested in what he can do. Jaehyun says that he will be under her guidance from now on. Yu-sung says it will be a pleasure, but before anything, she wants to check his talent and asks if that's okay. The protagonist was already expecting this. Thinking from their perspective, the Manhwa Guild probably wants to know how skilled he is. Sung Jae notices the guild master's expression and has to make sure he's prepared for everything. Jaehyun now knows she wants to test his abilities and asks what he should do. With a snap of her fingers, Yu-sung summons a spell that spreads throughout the environment. She summons a mana cube and says that from now on, he'll have to overcome it. The cube leaves the protagonist impressed. Yu-sung asks if he thinks it's fair, stating that for someone talented enough to sign a priority negotiation contract with the guild, this should be the minimum to accomplish. Usually, mana cubes are used by level B mages to gain a better understanding of their sensitivities, and since Jaehyun isn't used to it, he may have difficulties, as only 7% of raiders have managed to overcome the cube, and he wonders if he can meet this challenge. He thinks that Yu-sung is trying to lower his spirits, but she says she's not, as even if he fails, it won't affect his hiring, and nothing will be changed. Jaehyun thinks that he can't do anything now, not even back down from the challenge. Even if he fails, he has to keep evolving. Then, Yu-sung tells Sung Jae to make the preparations. He asks if she thinks everything will be okay, since the mana cube is something even strong mages have difficulty overcoming, and she put a child to face it. However, Yu-sung says that the protagonist is not an ordinary person, and it's worth trying. Thus, Sung Jae obeys the order, and makes the preparations for the challenge, through the training arena control panel. Then, a portal opens in the cube, and the protagonist remembers hearing about this before his return. But compared to what he heard, what he sees looks much more dangerous. Yu-sung says they're ready to begin and expects good results, urging the protagonist to do his best. With this extra motivation, he steps fully into the portal. After crossing the mana cube portal, Sung Jae says sincerely that he's worried about him, and fully understands why the guild master has so much interest in him. But it doesn't change the fact that he's a child. Yet, Yu-sung believes he will succeed. Sung Jae asks if she has any particular reason for being so certain. Yu-sung just smiles, and responds that she feels he'll manage, but wonders how long it will take him to overcome the mana cube and get out. After crossing the portal, the protagonist falls into a water-filled place, but he realizes he seems to be swimming in a sea of mana. He can breathe normally, but he's worried about contracting vicious mana, an illness caused by exposure to an immense amount of mana. Normally, mana is similar to oxygen, necessary for casting spells and using abilities, but exposure to so much mana can even lead to death. There's no benefit in lingering here, and symptoms may not have appeared yet. Finding the exit is his priority now, and if he remembers correctly, there's only one way out of the mana cube, by locating the single door that connects to the outside among these whirlpools. Jaehyun knows he needs to concentrate to sense the mana wavelength. Among these wildly entangled mana waves, there's only one path that leads out. In the midst of concentrating, the protagonist senses something strange. He looks to one side, and sees something glowing at the bottom, wondering if it's a crystal. Jaehyun knows this is an overwhelmingly powerful mana, giving the sensation of truly being in an ocean of mana. Outside, Sung Jae says the master speaks as if the protagonist is clearly superior to the mana cube. Yu-sung affirms he is. Sung Jae has a question, but he thinks it might be too much to ask. It's only been a short time, but what the boy showed them took them by surprise. With this, Sung Jae asks how long the master thinks he'll take to get out. Yu-sung replies that she herself took about 40 minutes, and was the fastest in the country. Sung Jae is impressed by this. He knows anything can happen. His master believes in the protagonist's potential. He, however, thinks the boy won't be able to escape the mana cube, or they'll have a new record. Yu-sung doesn't know why, but she admits she thought the same. But she doesn't think the protagonist will come out of there desperate. Suddenly, something happens in the cube, and the master calls Sung Jae's attention. Sung Jae also looks at the mana cube, and notices something that surprises him. The cube is cracking. The cracks are spreading more and more. Sung Jae doesn't quite understand what's happening, and both are concerned about it. After that, he checks his phone, noticing that only 10 minutes have passed. In just 10 minutes, a crack appeared in the mana cube, and this is enough to pique their curiosity. Inside the cube, the protagonist stares at the crystal. The mana of the item is much denser than the surroundings, and he wonders if this is the core that keeps the cube standing. If that's the case, he can escape by breaking the crystal since there's no reason to look for another exit. Thus, the protagonist moves toward the item, and manages to grab it easily. With just one of his hands, he breaks the crystal, shattering it. Around him, he sees everything cracking, and he's pleased that it worked. As the cube fractures, the system alerts that the passive skill mana application essence has been acquired. Outside, Sunjae and the master are shocked, especially Sunjae, who didn't expect something like this. Typically, only 7% of mages manage to escape the mana cube, and those who do take, on average, 3 hours. B-rank mages take 2 hours, and A-rank mages take an hour and a half. S-rank mages take between 30 minutes and an hour. But in 10 minutes, the protagonist managed to get out. The current world record holder is Camilla from the European Union. She's a genius who entered the Guinness record with a time of 36 minutes. But Jaehyun just broke that record. With a difference of 26 minutes, he calmly exits the cube. And Sunjae is impressed, saying he broke the record by exiting in 10 minutes. The guild master approaches, and asks what he did to get out so quickly. The protagonist says he found a type of crystal in the cube and broke it. Yu Sung is very surprised to hear this. Since the crystal contains all the mana of the cube, she states that an ordinary awakened individual wouldn't be able to find it, let alone break it. But the fact that he not only found it but also broke it, means that the mana he possesses is greater than the mana contained in the entire cube, which leaves her a bit thoughtful. However, she steps back and says that's enough testing. She also says that by putting the name of the Yanoe Guild and her own name, Yu Sung, on the line, she vows to make him the best mage, and asks if he's ready for that. Elsewhere, Kim Yoo-young is with the protagonist's mother. Her friend says he's not there yet, and his mother says he seems to be a bit late, and isn't even answering the phone. But a luxurious car approaches, leaving both of them impressed. But when they least expect it, Jaehyun steps out of the car as if he's already used to it. Seeing this, Kim Yoo-young asks why the protagonist is getting out of such an expensive car. His mother doesn't know either. Before leaving, Sunjae says he'll see Jaehyun later, so they say goodbye for now. His mother asks if there's any chance her son might have gotten involved in something bad. The friend becomes super suspicious of him. After a while, they talk, and Kim Yoo-young asks if Jaehyun is sure that a warrior doesn't suit him, and if he's really going to become a mage. The protagonist replies yes, and he's already got everything prepared. He even sent in new documentation, stating that being a warrior is very exhausting. Kim Yoo-young says she's hearing this from a guy who just 3 seconds ago was saying that being a mage has no future, and asks why he changed his mind. Jaehyun replies that people change their minds all the time, and his friend says she never thought she'd hear that from him. She asks if Jaehyun will really be okay, because before he was sure he wanted to become a warrior, and even though he has more talent as a mage, he didn't want his mother to suffer more because of these things, as being a mage doesn't make much money, even working hard at it. Compared to mages, warriors are quite slow, and due to their high risk of injury, employers don't want to hire them. The protagonist knows this well, and tells his friend to change the subject. By the way, he asks what she's doing at his house, and if her parents went on a business trip again. Kim Yoo-young replies yes, so she decided to go to his house, and his mother even invited her to stay over. Jaehyun asks why she likes it there more than her own home, saying that it's a small place compared to her gigantic house. Actually, he knows that the girl is the only child of a very influential family. Her parents disassemble monster bodies and sell the parts. Since different monsters appear in each country, they frequently travel abroad, and as a result, Kim Yoo-young spends many nights alone. The protagonist's mother is very close to her family, so the girl often spends the night at his house. After the protagonist explains why he switched to becoming a mage, he asks Kim Yoo-young to teach him a bit about magic theory. Kim Yoo-young asks if he's just asking with words. Jaehyun asks what she wants and tells her to speak first, then he'll see if he'll do it or not. She says now that he's asked, she doesn't know what to ask for. Kim Yoo-young hesitates, pestering her friend. After thinking, she reaches a conclusion, and asks him to grant her a wish, anything she asks, but if he wants, he can refuse. The protagonist agrees to do it but warns that the deadline to ask for something is 1 year, and if she doesn't use it within that time, he won't do it. The girl finds that a bit unfair but agrees. In his thoughts, the protagonist thinks she'll end up forgetting within that time. He asks what kind of wish she's thinking of making with such a serious face, saying she looks ugly like that, which makes Kim Yoo-young furious. She remembers that the last time they saw each other, he left her alone and says now it's time for revenge. Kim Yoo-young hits him with a pillow, and Jaehyun says that's too much, but she doesn't want to hear it. While she hits the protagonist, his mother calls them for dinner. She's happy to see the two of them getting along, but Kim Yoo-young hasn't vented enough yet, and takes the chance to hit Jaehyun. He defends himself and seems to be enjoying the situation, even thinking that this isn't so bad. Some time later, far away, some birds appear in a dungeon, and a raider fights against them and a giant serpent. He has a dark aura, but his strength is great, as he has defeated several monsters. Another raider calls him Sonlo, and says that they only managed to carry out the raid peacefully thanks to him, and doesn't remember the last time they had such a good raid. Sonlo thanks him for the words, and pulls his sword out of the serpent. The raider says that if someone like him joined his guild, it would be great, and asks if he's considered the idea. Sonlo apologizes but says he doesn't plan to join any guild. The warrior tries to convince him otherwise, but Sonlo just stares at him with a dark look. The warrior insists that Sonlo join the guild, saying that Scarlet will provide him with the best of everything, but Sonlo only finds it irritating. The raider doesn't quite understand his reaction, and then, using his magic, Sonlo wraps him in chains, leaving the warrior anxious. Sonlo calls him inferior and filthy, stating he has a vulgar sense of greed. He reflects on what to truly expect from a human being, but soon concludes that humans aren't the only ones like this. The warrior is utterly confused, and seems to have forgotten where he is and what he was doing. Back to the protagonist, Yusung says that for the first lesson, she wants to see his sense and reflex in combat. In other words, they'll have a duel. Jaehyun asks if that isn't too much to start with. However, Yusung finds it funny for a kid who got out of the mana cube in 10 minutes to say something like that. Then, she asks Jaehyun to attack. The protagonist, without a doubt, knows that she's been fully prepared since last time, and definitely planned this from the beginning, so he prepares to fight. Yusung looks him up and down, and notices that he places his left foot forward, bending his knees slightly, and keeping his shoulders as low as possible, a stance that allows quick movement and dodging, typical of a warrior. Thus, Jaehyun attempts to attack the master. However, she hardly concerns herself with him, and dodges a punch with ease. Yusung grabs his fist, leaving the protagonist surprised at her ease in defending herself. She just smiles at him, and then, with a light movement, throws him across the arena. Jaehyun thought he'd at least land a punch, but, even as a healer, this is expected from an S-rank raider. Yusung says that from now on, she'll address him informally, saying that he once wanted to be a warrior, and it seems he hasn't let go of the habits from that time, mentioning that a mage wouldn't advance in that way. She also asks what the biggest difference is between a warrior and a mage. Jaehyun says it must be in combat, with a mage in the rear and a warrior on the front lines. Yusung says his answer is correct, and that the mage class is usually used to weaken enemies from a distance before delivering the final blow. But he tried to close the distance with his opponent. Fighting like this, as a mage with low defense, means he'll quickly be defeated. The guild master says she went easy on him but thinks she needs to take this a bit more seriously, stating that he needs to see how a mage truly fights. Then, she says she's going to attack, but not enough to hurt him. Besides, she's a healer and can heal him instantly. The protagonist is excited about the fight. Yusung knows he's holding back, and tells him to fight properly this time. Seeing her attack coming toward him, Jaehyun is startled. Then, he dodges the magic, rolling on the ground to avoid getting hit. Yusung says it's his turn now. He immediately prepares to attack. The system alerts that the electric current skill has been activated. With that, he attacks the guild master. Yusung realizes he used an A-rank skill, the electric current, and confirms that he was hiding his abilities. The fact that she evaded so easily leaves the protagonist impressed. But Yusung isn't about to let that slide, and she counterattacks right after. When the protagonist realizes her approach, it's already too late. Then, he's hit squarely. The master says that no matter how skilled he is, if he can't hit his target, he ends up being useless. Jaehyun gets up from the ground, not at all pleased to have been struck. For Yusung, this was unexpected, as she reduced the strength of her spell but didn't expect him to stand up. She prepares her next attack and asks if he thinks he'll withstand this one too. The protagonist is already exhausted. However, he uses his precious resource, Odin's Eye. As soon as Yusung Ho attacks, the protagonist's system alerts him that the universal derivation skill has been activated, and Divine Arrow too. With that, Yusung's attacks don't hit him. She realizes her spell failed, thinking that Jaehyun used reverse engineering and destroyed her spell in that time. The master says he surprises her more and more and asks how many tricks he still has up his sleeve. The protagonist replies that he doesn't know, but immediately after, he attacks her with his fire chain. Yusung wasn't expecting this, and was almost hit, but she conjured a shield just in time. Jaehyun's attack was very fast, and what's even more unbelievable is that this power is coming from a child. The protagonist continues to attack his opponent, making Yusung wonder how he can cast spells without chanting them. For mages, chanting has always accompanied spellcasting as a rule. High-level mages might be able to chant silently, but the spell's strength decreases. However, the protagonist is new to magic, and Yusung is puzzled as to how he's able to do this. On his side, the protagonist thinks his attack isn't having an effect and knows he doesn't have much mana left. Unlike Yusung, who says he's full of surprises. Jaehyun is amazed that she still has plenty of energy. But Yusung wants to teach him a lesson. She attacks him effortlessly, saying that Jaehyun is still very young. Once again, the protagonist falls to the ground, and he doesn't even know what happened. Yusung approaches and asks if he really thought he would win against her. The master helps Jaehyun to his feet. In his thoughts, he recalls the last attack, and that he couldn't even see it. This is the distance between him and an S-rank raider. Yusung stares at the protagonist. Jaehyun thinks that the experience he gained as a warrior back then was hopeful, casting without delay and an incredible speed in magical derivation. This makes Yusung think that, if it's him, she believes it's possible to try something different. Then she says she got some ideas while watching him during the fight. She adds that everyone has thought of it at least once, but no one succeeded. A fighting style that only he can learn. She asks if he doesn't find it interesting. Jaehyun considers the possibility of learning a unique fighting style, and Yusung tells him to call her teacher from now on, congratulating him on being her first apprentice. After that, elsewhere, Jaehyun is studying, and someone breaks his concentration. Kim Yoo-young asks if he's listening to her. The protagonist replies that he is, but tells her to finish eating before speaking. He bought instant noodles for her, as payment for the lessons, but she's not tired of it yet, and is already on her 4th bowl. Kim Yoo-young says yes, and she won't get tired of it anytime soon. Returning to the lessons, she talks about magical battle, magical buffs, and magical healing, with various classifications for magic. But these are the 3 most important. The protagonist's system alerts him that his understanding of magic has increased. Magical efficiency has risen to 5%. He notices that every time he does something, the system alerts him immediately, as if it wants him to improve. His friend says he's getting good at this and asks if he's the same person who only focused on being a warrior, since he's learned in days what takes others months. Jaehyun tries to be modest and says the girl also memorized the magic formulas in 3 days. Kim Yoo-young doesn't like him being informal and demands to be called teacher. She says she can't say much more, since she studied magic before him, and if he keeps going like this, he'll catch up with her in no time. The protagonist asks his teacher why that matters, because he has to be good at magic at the same level he was in his aptitude test. In his thoughts, he says he should be complaining, as his life is on the line. Kim Yoo-young tells him that she never mentioned this before, but when he said he wanted to be a warrior, she was very surprised. Even though being a mage doesn't bring in as much money, she asks how he could just disregard the aptitude test results, stating that even he must find it strange, since he must already know that he's now a mage, and how people see mages these days. With that, the protagonist gets lost in his thoughts, and remembers something from his past, wondering if his decision was truly his own or not. His friend resumes the conversation and asks if he's been practicing spellcasting. He replies that he has and is learning to cast spells with another teacher. Kim Yoo-young asks if he's being casual with her, and Jaehyun responds to his teacher that he isn't. But in his thoughts, he's still confused about what he just imagined, thinking he heard something strange. He remembers that Hell gave him 2 months to defeat a boss. However, he thinks now is not the time to lose focus, and he needs to think about something more useful. He recalls a TV commercial for a pill that promised to be a great help to numerous raiders worldwide, and concludes that, like that valuable pill, he would have the help he needs to overcome any situation. Back at the Yanoa Guild, Sung Jae supervises the training of some members. He looks at one in particular, telling the raider Park Woo-jin that his balance becomes unstable when he swings his sword. Then he tells the raider Kang Jina that her spell casting is slow, and if her healing doesn't reach her ally in time during battle, he'll die. After that, he approaches the guild master, and says that, considering they're rookies, they're not that bad, and their average rank is slightly better than last year's. Sung Jae notices that the guild master is distracted, so she apologizes. He asks if Yusung was thinking about Jaehyun. She says she really can't fool him. Sung Jae says he remembers that she wants to train him, and mentions that countless raiders have tried, but none succeeded. However, Yusung says she saw the boy's talent with her own eyes and asserts that if people claimed he was a veteran, there would be no reason to doubt it. She also says that he didn't make any unnecessary moves, and if another S-rank mage appears in the future, she has no doubt it will be Jaehyun. She reflects that she's still the only mage in the country who has reached S-rank, but even so, as a healer, her effectiveness in battles is somewhat low. But if Jaehyun emerges as a rising star, he will completely change the world of magic. Mana Enhancement Pill, as the name suggests, is an item that permanently increases the mana of the awakener who uses it. It was an item all mages desired. The protagonist tries to prepare something, but fails and becomes frustrated. He's already tried doing this several times, and has used 3 sets of ingredients. If he continues like this, he'll run out of money and is sure that the mixture needs to turn white in the first stage. It's not like he can ask anyone for help. With the pot on the stove, he waits. In November 2020, no one knows how to make a mana enhancement pill. It will only be invented in 5 years. This means he is the only one who knows the necessary ingredients and process. Before he returned in time, the pill's recipe was shared worldwide by a world-class alchemist. When he published the recipe, he said the following phrase: "I hope this pill can be of great help to numerous raiders around the world." But the protagonist knows that if he keeps going like this, it won't work. Instead, he thinks it's better to try something more likely to succeed. The alchemist's name was Lee Jae-sang, and Jae-hyun thinks that if he goes to him, it might be possible. Even if he can't make the elixir, forming a connection with him won't be a bad thing. He remembers that the alchemist was a senior in his first year at the Miller's Academy. With that, he knows his next destination, and will have to go to Miller's Academy. Later, the protagonist's mother arrives home, and upon seeing the kitchen, sees the mess her son made and the dirt he left behind. Looking like a horror movie, she wonders if she should call the police but realizes nothing was stolen, and asks herself if there's any thief in this world who would only turn the kitchen upside down and not the whole house. Armed with a pan, she searches for the supposed intruder in the house. Back to the protagonist, he knows that as soon as Yggdrasil appeared along with the monsters, some people were able to adapt quickly. One of them was the quick blade, Lee Jae-shin. When the first awakened disappeared without a trace, Lee appeared, as if to fill his place, as Korea's first S rank. The person Jae-hyun needs to meet now is his youngest son, Lee Jae-sang. With that, he heads to a teleportation station, and says he'd like to take a portal to Daegu. Daegu is currently abandoned due to the monster outbreak, a city where monsters are everywhere, and people have to fear for their lives as soon as they set foot there. But there's a reason people go there, so the attendant asks if the protagonist is a cadet from Miller's Academy. He replies that no, he's still just a student with potential. After that, he heads to the location, knowing that if he walks a little further, he'll be at the main entrance of the academy. A familiar place from his youth, but one that held many bad memories. However, none of that matters now, so he decides to go in, as he has no reason to stay idle. This region isn't safe. There are probably some monsters still lurking that haven't been defeated. Jae-hyun enters the academy with a temporary pass, and tries to find Lee Jae-sang among the others. Although he's in the combat department, he wasn't very talented. The likelihood of him, who doesn't like fighting, using the Miller's combat facilities was very low. So Jae-hyun decides to check the classrooms first, but he quickly notices some strange commotion. He decides to check what's going on, and hears some people discussing breaking up a fight. But they're too cowardly to help the stuttering boy who's getting beaten up out of fear they'll get hurt too. The protagonist doesn't like their attitude, and thinks that causing a little mess won't hurt, so he heads towards the fight, thinking no one will stop him either. Soon he enters the classroom, and comes face to face with his target, who, surprisingly, was the one he was looking for. The stuttering boy tries to apologize, but the protagonist only focuses on the aggressor, who, upon seeing him, asks if he's friends with the stuttering boy. With a methodical gaze, the protagonist doesn't even respond. Then he notices that Lee Jae-sang is quite exhausted, but he's glad to have found him. As soon as the protagonist finds the boy, both he and the aggressor are confused. He asks if Lee is okay, but the boy doesn't understand why he's so concerned. The bully grabs the protagonist's shoulder and asks if he's the stuttering boy's brother, saying he didn't know he had one, as they don't look alike at all. And since he hasn't mentioned his family, he thought monsters had killed them all. He says he's having a conversation with the boy, and tells the protagonist that if he doesn't want to get into trouble, he'd better leave, but Jae-hyun pushes him away. After that, the bully is surprised, and so is the boy. Jae-hyun says it would be better if Lee went to the infirmary, and asks if he can walk. The bully, still surprised at being confronted, mocks the protagonist afterward, saying he can't understand when someone is speaking kindly to him, and grabbing his clothes asks if he wants to die. The protagonist says that's the second time, and he doesn't know why people have been getting on his case so much lately. He recalls his friend told him to have a clear image in mind and calculate the magic formula, then construct the spell and use it. That's the basics of magic. The image he wants right now is a beam of light that shoots like an arrow, just like the one Yu-sung uses. After that, his system alerts him that the divine skill has been activated. With it, Jae-hyun hits the bully, causing him great pain, and Lee is quite impressed, because he saw the protagonist use a spell without chanting. After that, outside the room, the others are very confused. They discuss whether he chanted or not, and wonder how a simple divine arrow broke a warrior's arm, speculating that the bully is weaker than he appears and goes around bragging all the time. In the aggressor's mind, he thinks if this keeps up, his reputation will be ruined. He doesn't know where the protagonist came from, but he doesn't want to let him go. Furious, he insults the protagonist, and prepares to attack. Lee Jae-sang shouts for him to be careful. After that, the arrogant bully attacks, but Jaehyun just stares at his blow. With his Odin's Eye ability, he remembers that Yusung said to create a barrier, he needs to wrap mana around his entire body. That way, the attacks will be deflected. With that, the protagonist's system alerts him that the mana barrier skill has been activated. And with it, he disarms his opponent. Then he uses a magical barrier. The fool doesn't know how to react. Right after, the protagonist grabs his face. The strength applied makes him uncomfortable. And seriously, Jaehyun asks if he's finished. The opponent even tries to react, but the protagonist's divine arrow skill is activated again. With it, the opponent is hit and thrown far away, falling unconscious shortly after. This defeat of his attacker leaves Lee Jae-sang surprised, wondering who this person is who helped him. Then the protagonist looks at him, making the boy feel scared. But Jaehyun doesn't want to hurt him, and walks towards the fool. He sees the opponent's face all bruised, and says he gave him a good beating. Or does he always look like that? After that, he takes one of his items, saying he didn't buy it to be used this way, but he'll use it anyway. Lee Jae-sang seems to recognize the item. Jaehyun opens the bottle's cap, and pours all the liquid onto the defeated opponent's face. Lee Jae-sang observes the potion's effect, and says he doesn't know who made it, but it's definitely effective. The protagonist says they should go to the infirmary, but seeing the boy's face, he realizes he's still very scared. They leave the room and walk a bit. Lee Jae-sang feels a bit uneasy, and says the infirmary is in the other direction. The protagonist doesn't sense anyone nearby and says that here, no one will hear them. Lee Jae-sang was already suspicious, and now knows the protagonist was after him because he knows who he is. With that, he asks if it was his father who sent him, but Jaehyun thinks he misunderstood, and sees no reason for him to be more cautious with him. So he replies that no, and he doesn't know who his father is either. However, it seems the boy doesn't believe him. Lee Jae-sang asks why the protagonist came after him. Jaehyun replies that he needs to ask a favor, and that he wants him to make a certain pill, but the boy says he doesn't know how to make something like that. The protagonist states that he's good at alchemy. He also says the person who sold this potion on the black market was him. Lee Jae-sang is surprised to be found out, and wonders how the protagonist got information from the black market. Jaehyun knows the boy is thinking, and also knows there was no way to have found him through the black market, since this market is a transaction system that completely hides the user's identity. The item sale, the product's value, and the container, everything is managed through the Acer system, making it quite secure. If not for that, Jaehyun wouldn't have thought so much about selling Odin's Eye. Although it's pointless to think about that now. Jaehyun stares at the boy and sees he's uncomfortable, and thinks that fortunately, the black market also works with the Norner system, and if he couldn't buy this potion, everything would have been much harder. So he insists that the boy made the potion. Lee Jae-sang even tries to avoid the topic, but he's not good at lying. The protagonist says he understands why he wants to hide it, but says he doesn't have much time. The boy remembers the moment he registered his items on the black market, and wonders if it was a mistake to do that. He didn't imagine things would turn out this way when trying to make money like this. Lee Jae-sang becomes very worried about his future, because he thinks he'll die if his father finds out. He tries to escape the situation, asking the protagonist not to tell anyone his secret. However, Jaehyun reassures him, saying he has no intention of threatening him. He hands over the potion bottle, saying he just needs an excellent alchemist, who can make what he desires. Lee is surprised to be called an excellent alchemist, and grows suspicious of the protagonist, thinking his father might really be behind this. Asking who he really is, he replies that he's just a potential student of Milla's academy, and his name is Min Jae-hyun. Holding the potion bottle, Lee Jae-sang says that first, he'll listen to what the protagonist has to say. Then they go to another location, and the protagonist compliments the boy's workspace. Lee Jae-sang thanks him for the compliment. He doesn't really know how to behave in someone else's presence, thinking twice before speaking. Then he mentions the pill the protagonist wants to make. Jaehyun says it's a mana enhancement pill, one that permanently increases a raider's mana. Lee asks if that's really possible. The protagonist confirms it is and knows that Lee invented it in the future. At this moment, Lee asks what ingredients are needed for its creation. He considers mandrake horn or flowing water from Jotunheim, but doesn't think any of that is sufficient. The protagonist notices that the boy's aura has changed. He's not even stuttering anymore, and on top of that, he got most of the ingredients right. This makes him someone truly talented, sparking even more of Jaehyun's interest. Lee says that if it's that kind of elixir, it would be better to ask another alchemist, but Jaehyun insists that he wants him to make it, and will provide everything he needs. Jaehyun knows that, with the recipe, other alchemists can create the pill, but the one with unparalleled talent among them is Lee Jae-sang. If he's going to invest in someone, it should be him. With that, he manages to convince the boy to make the pill. Lee isn't sure he'll succeed, but Jaehyun insists that he at least try. The boy argues that if he fails, Jaehyun will be the one who loses. However, Jae-hyun says he's investing in him because he believes he has senior level skill. Investing in someone is never easy and always comes with the risk of failure. Jae-hyun thinks that even if he keeps trying, he won't get it right the first time, and he wants to work with the boy. Lee agrees and thinks this is the first time someone has believed in him so much. The mission to make a connection with Lee has already been completed. By the light of a window, Lee Jae-sang thinks about his conversation with the protagonist, and remembers that Jae-hyun said he was investing in him because of his skills, and that people don't always get it right the first time. Jae-hyun also said he wanted to work with him, and the boy clings to those words. He sees himself as a coward without talent, unlike his brothers. He also lost his mother very early, and has been alone his whole life, because he never gained his father's approval. He thought he had nothing good in him, and now, for the first time, he has someone's trust. Lee is moved when he thinks about this, and how Jae-hyun's words touched his heart deeply. Back to the protagonist, his system keeps reminding him about the main hell mission, so he decides not to waste more time and returns to training. Magic arrows come his way, thrown by his teacher, the guild master. Jae-hyun dodges all the attacks as the arrows come toward him. He also uses a magic shield to defend himself. Jae-hyun has learned the divine arrow skill and uses it too. His teacher is forced to defend against her own magic, but her shield starts to give way, and this surprises her a bit, noticing that her apprentice has become stronger in a short period. So, she thinks of another way to react. Meanwhile, they stare at each other for a brief moment, until the protagonist activates another one of his abilities. Yu-sung isn't left behind and prepares to attack as well. Jae-hyun notices her movement, and sees he's about to be hit if he doesn't do something. However, Sung-jae interrupts the training, saying time's up, and that they've both given it their all. Just thinking about the training room made of arc metal being all destroyed, considering it takes an incredible amount of force to even scratch it, makes him think that if he hadn't intervened, the training room would have been completely destroyed. After the training, Yu-sung says the protagonist has gotten stronger very quickly. Compared to the beginning, his spells now are more powerful. She asks if he's been studying magic theory separately. Jae-hyun replies that yes, he has, with a friend. Yu-sung says that's good, as she can't teach theory as well, so she was a bit worried, stating that he must have a very smart friend. Jae-hyun replies that yes, but he thinks the problem with his friend is her strange personality. By the way, Yu-sung asks if the protagonist really wants to raid a dungeon again. He replies that yes, he does, and wants to test the effectiveness of his training so far. The teacher says that with his current skills, an E-rank dungeon should be easy, and tells him to do his best. The protagonist thinks it would be nice if it really were an E-rank, but he needs to decide things rationally, not based on feelings. He wonders if he can really do it, because his enemy was a C-rank boss, a monster he would never be able to defeat alone. Jae-hyun knows he's finished all the preparations and that now all that's left is the battle. However, he isn't overly confident, but he'll fight anyway. After that, he goes to Lee Jae-sang. The boy looks tired from working so hard, but he managed to make the requested item. Jae-hyun thanks him for his effort. As soon as he sees the item, his system registers it as a mana enhancement pill, which permanently increases the user's magic attribute. He asks if it's okay to use it now, and Lee confirms it is. Thus, his system identifies that he has ingested the pill, and alerts that his magic has increased by 15 points. The protagonist thinks this is an incredible effect, enough to make its bitter taste seem sweet. Alchemy is fundamentally deeper and harder than science. Even when making the same item, the effect can vary depending on the alchemist. If he had given the ingredients to a different alchemist, he might have had a different result, perhaps gaining 5 points instead of 15. That's why he praises Lee's work, saying he has quite a talent. Lee says this was only possible because he believed in his abilities and thanks him. Jae-hyun says he's the one who should be grateful and asks the boy to rest now since it seems he hasn't slept in a while. The boy agrees and says that if Jae-hyun needs anything else, he should just ask. Jae-hyun bids farewell to his friend, and thinks he's now 100% ready for his mission. The day he will finally defeat the Night Shadow, even though there are still about 10 days left before the deadline. In another scene, Hel pets Garm, and says it seems a very important guest will appear today, even though there are still just over 9 days left. The protagonist takes the initiative and heads to the dungeon entrance. He has prepared some equipment like the Valkyrie ring, necklace, and earring, a set that triggers the passive mana drain ability. Jae-hyun thinks he's in great condition, and these items should be enough. Then he looks at Sung-jae, who then activates the door, facing the dungeon head-on. The protagonist says it's time to begin. His system alerts that he has entered the dungeon, and he's been teleported to the land of death, Helheim. After this, he falls through a portal, and lands smoothly on the ground, then walks in the direction of his mission. He hadn't felt it before, but this terrifying mana that's concentrated in certain spots is probably the aura of the Night Shadow. If he defeats it, he'll be able to meet Hel again. Jaehyun still has questions about Loki and being someone's adversary. He walks and encounters some low-level monsters. They try to attack him but fail, and he completely ignores them. The protagonist can only think about the questions he wants to ask. He looks to the side and notices a strange movement, immediately recalling his teacher's lesson about a battle mage's combat style. Yu-sung said that a battle mage's combat style is a hybrid style, since it uses both magic and physical attacks, and so far, no one has managed to specialize in it. It's not as powerful as long-range mages, and doesn't have all the skills of a close-range warrior, making it an odd position. That doesn't specialize in anything, but Yu-sung tells him that his case is different. After applying what he learned in combat, the protagonist's system alerts that he achieved multiple kills and received a bonus for it. Outside the dungeon, Sung-jae waits for him to come out. He's distracted by his phone, but ends up noticing someone else there. He becomes alert, as he wasn't informed of any other presence. From a distance, he sees a car approaching, and as it gets closer, the driver calls him Senior and says he's in such a remote place that it was a bit hard to find him. She steps out of the vehicle and says it's been a while since she last saw him. Sung-jae asks what she's doing there. She replies that she's also working now, and while handling some things for the guild, she wondered if she'd see him again. So she had to come here since she didn't see him at the Yanhwa guild. Sung-jae thinks about what she's saying, as Yeonjur hasn't called him even once since they graduated high school. He politely says it's good to see her, but he knows she wouldn't come to a place like this just to see him. She asks if Sung-jae is managing the dungeon. He replies that it's not something she should worry about. Yeonjur says that dungeons usually aren't part of his responsibilities, asking if he got demoted or something, but she corrects herself and says she's actually curious about something else. She mentions hearing a rumor that the guild master is sick, and asks if it's true. Sung-jae replies that it's not and asks where she heard that. Yeonjur says there are many people with eyes and ears open everywhere, especially in the Healers Guild. Sung-jae concludes that she's implying that, with all their money, they've hired spies to infiltrate his guild. So he plays along, thanking her for the information, saying that thanks to her, he'll have more things to do when he gets back. Yeonjur has one last question, and asks if he knows a boy named Min Jae-hyun. Sung-jae is startled, and the woman says it seems the boy has been making some visits to the Yanhwa guild recently, and meeting quite a lot with the guild master. Once again, Yeonjur asks if he knows anything about this. Sung-jae simply replies that he doesn't think an outsider needs to worry about it either. The girl feels a bit frustrated, and says she already knew he wouldn't answer, because she was already aware that Senior Park Sung-jae is a rigid person, and the reason she came here was at least to pretend she's doing something for her guild, to deserve the salary she gets. Right after, she says goodbye, and leaves the place in her car. After that, Sung-jae thinks he needs to report this to the guild master. Meanwhile, inside the dungeon, the protagonist waits for his enemy atop a pile of monster corpses. His system alerts him that the boss Night Shadow has appeared. He wastes no time and attacks, saying it's been a while since the last time. The monster becomes slightly irritated, but the protagonist says this time will be different. Immediately, the shadow charges to attack, but Jaehyun easily dodges this assault. From a distance, he stares at the creature, and fires a few shots at it. With the damage taken, the shadow gets even more irritated, and prepares to attack again, approaching its target. Observing his opponent carefully, the protagonist recalls his combat lessons. He takes a step to the left, ready for the fight. The creature charges again, but the protagonist dodges with ease, using his feet to move lightly. The shadow doesn't give up attacking, but the protagonist takes 2 steps to the right, and tilts his head slightly to the left. Then, he takes a wide step to the right. Mocking, he asks if the monster is getting angry because things aren't going as it wants. After that, he activates his electric chain ability, directing the attack at his enemy. The monster is hit squarely. Immediately after, the protagonist prepares another attack, and fires at the shadow. Several of his attacks are launched, not giving the monster a chance to retaliate. But with this, Jaehyun realizes it's not enough. He uses another of his abilities, striking the shadow from above with chains. This time, the blow was more effective. The monster doesn't like being wounded at all. Jaehyun stares at it with a cold and serious look. However, the creature manages to break free from the chains, using all its strength. Then, his system alerts him that the boss has entered berserk mode, increasing its strength and dexterity significantly. Seeing this, Jaehyun is a bit surprised. A different effect hits him and even confuses his system. After this, he sees an alert saying that if the stigma is not removed within 10 minutes, he will die. The condition for removal is to kill the shadow, but the protagonist has never heard of instant death before and is scared. Quickly, he activates the universal derivation ability, and his system emits a message. But he can't read it, so he concludes that hell is behind this, and wonders why she created something like this. He sees his death approaching and can't remove it, so he concludes that his only option is to defeat the monster quickly. However, the shadow is much stronger now, and doesn't let him get close. Jae-hyun realizes the enemy is retreating, and he attacks from a distance with his arrows. His time is running out, and the creature is getting angrier. The protagonist concludes that the shadow is taunting him, as it must know it will win if it prolongs the fight. So he considers using an area ability that can't be dodged. But the monster anticipates this, and uses one of its abilities. Jae-hyun notices the enemy's movement, and his system alerts him that his resistance has failed, temporarily acquiring the debuff, Fear. Then, the shadow attacks, and with Jae-hyun paralyzed, he ends up getting hit. After taking damage, the Fear debuff is removed. Quickly, he distances himself from the enemy, and tries another strategy. However, the system warns him that his time is short. He considers continuously using crowd control abilities. Though he's not sure, he thinks that if he uses Judgment of Light again, the shadow might block him. With that, he'd consume a lot of mana and become useless. So he needs to find another way. Looking at the monster, Jae-hyun thinks he landed a hit on its eye a moment ago, and its line of sight must be narrower than before. He concludes that he should first blind the enemy. Using the Wind Boost ability, his dexterity was temporarily increased, and the creature seems to sense what's coming. Jae-hyun prepares to return to the fight, and asks if the monster thought he would run straight at it like a man. Then, he activates the Flash Bomb skill. The explosion of light temporarily blinds the shadow, allowing the protagonist to get closer. This way, he manages to approach the enemy unnoticed. But the monster is persistent, and with one of its skills, it summons other monsters to assist it. The protagonist's time is short, and he realizes the boss still has energy left. But he says he feels sorry for the enemy because it's already too late for that. With the sacrifice skill, he faces the undead. The skill has switched to attack mode, along with the Judgment of Light. His system starts counting down to his death, which is very close. With only a few seconds remaining, the protagonist celebrates, affirming that he succeeded. The shadow was defeated by him, and his system confirms it, stating that Jae-hyun earned the title of the one who overcame the first trial. Hell, who is watching everything, says she now understands because it seems there's always a reason behind his choices, and she calls the protagonist to her temple. After defeating the shadow, the protagonist receives several bonuses from the system, in addition to leveling up 3 times and earning the title, the one who overcame the first trial. After that, the system performs a user qualification check, and states that Hell's Temple is calling him. Jae-hyun then arrives at the temple. Soon he encounters a beast, which leaves him a bit surprised. The beast charges toward him, and now Jae-hyun is truly frightened. Faced with a creature like this, Garma charges at him, but its owner calls it, and tells it to escort her guest. The giant wolf obeys, pointing the way for the protagonist. Jae-hyun realizes he has finally arrived, and feels a bit apprehensive about what's to come. As soon as he enters a certain room, he calls for Hell and asks where she is. The wolf guards the area, and Hell's voice says she didn't believe he would pass the trial. Then she appears and congratulates him, saying that he is destined to be the adversary, affirming that he did a great job passing the designated test. Jae-hyun is puzzled about what all this is for. He questions why she gave him the Norner system, and why she made him go through such a test. Hell laughs at his questions, and replies that she did it to turn him into the adversary. Jae-hyun still doesn't understand what this means, and asks why he was chosen. Hell responds that he was born with this destiny, the great and powerful adversary of the Aesir, the one who will kill the great god Odin. That's what Loki and she want him to do. Jae-hyun still doesn't understand why they want him to kill Odin, but Hell says he doesn't need to understand, as she never intended for him to understand. The protagonist gets angry, and Hell notices, and says he probably can't comprehend, because he's being used as a pawn by the gods. But she tells him not to forget something. This isn't just their story of the gods who oppose the Aesir. Hell states that the world is coming to an end, since Odin wants to rule everything and everyone. So they need the protagonist's power, the great adversary of prophecy, to stop him. Jae-hyun insists he still has questions. Hell, however, simply tells him to grow stronger, and says she'll eagerly await the day they meet again. After sending him away, Hell speaks to someone nearby, asking if that person will stand there doing nothing because she doesn't remember inviting them. The protagonist returns to the dungeon entrance, and is frustrated that his questions weren't answered. He says it's the same thing every day. In the end, he couldn't ask a single question properly. His system alerts him that he received a gift, the passive skill, Hell's Blessing, which nullifies penalties applied to the user. After that, Hell's uninvited guest introduces himself, apologizing for his lack of manners, and says he couldn't resist upon hearing about the protagonist's arrival. Mimir says that no matter how well he knows him, he'll always be a very direct person, and asks Hel how it was to see him in front of her. She replies that it's still too early to draw conclusions, since the adversary has only just taken his first step. But the old man says it seems that Hel likes him. She admits that his growth is better than she imagined, saying the protagonist overcame the restrictions she placed on him and made it this far. Hel states that she clearly misjudged him initially. Mimir says it eases his mind to know that he's doing well. She asks if the old man has gotten what he wanted, saying he must have something else to discuss. Mimir says he knows nothing about this. However, Hel calls him an insolent old man and asks if he's going to play dumb until the end, as he mixes cunning with a deceptive appearance, just like his second brother. The opponent's law of causality was clearly distorted, and she asks if Mimir really thought she wouldn't notice after seeing it in front of her. Hel also says it's a shame for him, as it seems his title of Giant of Wisdom is a thing of the past. Mimir admits he can't fool her. She says that's not all, and she's certain the opponent's left eye is the one Odin sacrificed to enter the Well of Wisdom. With that, she demands an answer from Mimir, but he says nothing. Then, she asks what he and Loki are planning. Mimir says he would love to respond, but it's still too early because that's fate. Hel says she's used to waiting, but she can't just sit idly by. Mimir notes that it seems she has an idea and asks what it would be. She says the opponent is still very immature. According to that prophecy, many difficult things await him, so he needs a guide to put him on the right path, even in the face of an insurmountable wall. 7 days until the entrance at Milla's academy. The protagonist goes to a shopping mall. A woman accompanying him says he doesn't look well, and asks what he's thinking about. Jaehyun insists it's nothing. She then says they should hurry and buy what he needs. In his thoughts, Jaehyun concludes that even though he's been through a lot, he's gained nothing but more questions. At least he gained something good out of it all. The passive skill, Blessing of Hel, Yx rank. Besides that, he has other strong abilities, and a rank he's never heard of in the Aesir system. Yx means extraordinary. Jaehyun wonders if this really doesn't exist in the Aesir system, and if the other abilities are like this too. He's still curious about what the other gods have against the Aesir to grant him such an ability. The protagonist remembers that Hel said she and Loki want him to kill Odin. As he loses himself in his thoughts, the guild assistant does the shopping, and ends up paying 300 million won for a sword. Jaehyun wonders why she's buying such a poor item for such a high price. She says that although Milla's usually provides one of these, the quality of their items isn't very good, so it's better to have one's own. Then she looks at her phone for the next item to buy. The list is enormous, leaving the protagonist astonished. Earlier, the girl introduced herself as Parkana, from the Yanoa Guild, saying that the guild master wanted to gift him, as his entry to Milla's academy is closer than ever, and asks if Jaehyun could spare some of his time. He thought it would be a few elixirs and artifacts, but the quantity of items and their values are on another level. After buying a few things, Hannah says they'll look for armor. However, Jaehyun says he doesn't need armor since he already has one. He checks the armor in his system, which he obtained after defeating the Shadow, a rank B protective equipment. Jaehyun thinks there's no way to buy better armor than this. Moreover, this armor is one that grants a very rare ability. Hannah asks if he needs an artifact that gives him stealth ability. She says every raider wants one of these, and it'll probably be hard to find one there. Jaehyun, however, says he doesn't need it, and also states that people can learn this ability. Unless he's lucky enough to find it in a dungeon, it'll be hard to obtain one. Hannah says that's true and mentions that the only raider in the country with that ability is her brother. The protagonist asks who her brother is. She replies that it's manager Sung Jae. This shocks the protagonist, as he had no idea. Then Hannah says they should go look for more weapons. Jaehyun still can't process the fact that she's Sungji's sister, thinking they don't look alike at all. As they walk through the mall, out of nowhere, his system alerts him that it's resonating with the user. Jaehyun feels a strong headache. Around him, he starts seeing lights. With his Odin's eye, he sees lights similar to those at the Gate of Treasures, so he runs to follow them, and Hannah tells him to wait. In another nearby location, the protagonist crosses a door and finds himself in front of a treasure. His system alerts him that the absolute eye of God's skill has pierced through the false illusions and revealed the absolute truth, leaving Jaehyun astonished. Elsewhere, a battle is taking place. An opponent is being attacked by someone who appears much stronger than him. The battle ends quickly, and An Hwaeon is declared the winner. The person behind him thinks Hwaeon is a monster, and indeed the results of his opponent's training weren't bad, but the difference in their talents is quite clear. That's why people say he will be a future S-rank raider. However, the man is Hwaeon's father, and doesn't show his excitement in front of his son. He tells Hwaeon not to get excited, as it was a battle he was obligated to win. Hwaeon says he understands that. The father says that, since the duel is over, Hwaeon should prepare for the next planned activity, and also that he should take a shower and come down afterward. In the shower, Hwaeon thinks he hates this exhausting life where his opinion doesn't matter. The raider he wants to be isn't like this, and he doesn't know when he reached this point. Back to the protagonist, he found an keepable item called Mistletoe, which grants the user greater mana perception. He's quite pleased with it, and wonders if it's another joke from the Norner system? Nearby, Huiyan walks by, having gone shopping with his father after the shower. Still at the equipment stores, Huiyan's father buys weapons, and Huiyan asks if he needs all of that. His father says he shouldn't think it's too much, as he is a future S-rank raider. Huiyan says that if they use that much money, there might not be enough for his mother's hospital bills. His father says that's enough. He'll handle that problem. His son just needs to focus on training. With that scolding, Huiyan stays quiet. But he wonders what he's doing there. Even in disguise, people recognize him, saying he's a martial arts genius. Some even claim they'd like to be raiders like him. But Huiyan feels no different from a zoo monkey. When he was little, he had his awakening. His mother smiled at him lovingly and patted his head. That day, he dreamed of becoming a raider. His family was living a mediocre, obscure life, and he was their ray of hope. But that ray of hope was nothing more than a tool for his father. And now he's a machine, nothing but a tool following his father's commands. Huiyan feels pathetic and wonders if he can last 3 years at Milla's academy. Suddenly, the mall's speaker alerts all customers that a dungeon break occurred nearby, and demons appeared. The association has sent raiders who are on their way, so they guide the customers on how to proceed. Huiyan is surprised by the news. The security team tries to keep the customers safe, informing them that the raiders will arrive soon. Huiyan's father runs from the place and calls his son, saying he's a genius who holds South Korea's future, and if he gets hurt there, he'll be at a disadvantage for the Milla's event. With no reason for him to get involved in this mess, Huiyan thinks the Raider Association can handle it quickly, as his father said, but he thinks that, in the time it takes for them to arrive, some civilians might not be able to defend themselves. In this, he sees an opportunity to act. His father tries to stop him from helping, but Huiyan wants to prove his worth and independence as a raider. He wants to see who he is now, because he wants to reclaim the essence he had as a child, the one he wanted to show his mother. But as he arrives at the scene of the conflict, he finds himself face to face with several goblins. Huiyan feels scared and freezes. His body doesn't move, only his pupils shift. He can't even move the tips of his toes. But he sees the enemies approaching and tries to react somehow. He knew it would be dangerous. Huiyan feels frustrated and wonders how he can be so afraid of mere low-ranked demons, since he's dreamed of becoming a raider for so long. But before he's attacked, the protagonist appears, saving Huiyan from this demon attack. He's so startled that he falls backward. The protagonist recognizes him upon seeing him, since Huiyan is indeed famous. Before this commotion, Jaehyun was still analyzing some items, when Hannah approaches and asks why he's at the location of the unknown item. She sees a piece of rock and asks what it is. Jaehyun realizes the item he acquired appears like a rock to others, so he responds that it's nothing. He knows that if anyone else could see his system, it would be strange, yet he also doesn't feel the need to buy a weapon. Soon, he hears the same announcement that everyone else heard, about a demon invasion in the mall. Without a second thought, he leaves Hannah behind and heads towards the conflict, even jumping through a window to get there. As he falls towards the demons, he softens his landing to avoid injury, but with his abilities activated, he creates a great impact upon reaching the ground. When he faces the enemies, he realizes there are more than he expected. It might be a bit challenging to deal with them, without anyone getting hurt, but that won't stop him from acting. Advancing a bit, he defeats some enemies, and comes across a lone person, whom he quickly recognizes as the famous raider Huiyan. Huiyan, on the other hand, is utterly terrified, and realizes his hood is down, making him easily recognizable. The protagonist didn't expect to find him in a place like this, but he knows that currently, he's just a student at Milla's. With that, he decides to ask for help. Huiyan notices a demon approaching and warns the protagonist. However, Jaehyun is quick and easily takes down the enemy. Then, he says they can't let the demons get to where the people are, and asks if Huiyan plans to stay on the ground, telling him to pull himself together and wield his weapon. Huiyan agrees, and strangely, when he heard the protagonist say that, the fear holding him back faded. To him, this is what it means to be a true raider. Now, what he has to do is help him save the people. The protagonist asks if Huiyan knows how to use the taunt ability, and says that if he's composed, there are some aggro demons nearby. There are also various goblins around, so Huiyan shouldn't lose sight of them, and needs to attract as many as possible. Huiyan thinks he can do it, and knows he can't hesitate. He must do whatever he can. Then, he activates the taunt cry ability. His system alerts him that demons within a 50-meter radius are watching him, and his attack damage will be reduced by 30%. With that, the ability is activated repeatedly, attracting all nearby enemies. The protagonist knows that this ability is of a much higher level than regular taunt, and Huiyan's level is high enough to use it. He thinks it's because talented people are different, Even so, the highest rank Huiyan reached before his regression was rank B. He's unsure if it's because of Huiyan's weak mindset that he just witnessed, or due to some other unknown reason. Jaehyun also knows that, for this, Huiyan was called the misfortune genius, but he doesn't mind, because he believes a weak nature can be fixed and that Huiyan has the potential to be quite useful. For the sake of his goal, the protagonist needs Huiyan to grow properly. But right now, he wants to end this mess quickly. So, the two fight the enemies, who, in the end, didn't put up much of a challenge. Suddenly, someone approaches and asks what's going on here. Both are confused by the appearance, and the unknown man stares at them. He introduces himself as Park Jae-hoon from the National Raiders Association Management Headquarters, and asks if the two of them handled everything alone. Somewhat shyly, Huiyan responds that they did. The man recognizes Huiyan and has heard a lot about him being a genius, but thinks he's just a student, and the other one seems to be the same age. Even so, they both took care of all the goblins alone, so he's unsure how to report this to his superiors. The protagonist says he would like to discuss it with Jae-hoon, and suggests they just say the association handled all the demons, as no one would believe it was them. However, Jae-hoon says that's against the law. Jaehyun insists that there's no one watching. Park Jae-hoon says they should know that they're associated with the government, so he can't make that decision alone. But if they don't want to be noticed, he can take care of it, and reward them for the raid as well. The protagonist agrees and tells the man to give his share to Huiyan, and keep it a secret that he was there. He knows he doesn't need money while being supported by his guild, so it's better for him to have Huiyan indebted to him. Park Jae-hoon says he can do that, and asks if that's all. However, Huiyan insists on giving the protagonist credit. Jae-hoon doesn't understand the genius's attitude. Jaehyun states he has his reasons, and isn't willing to risk the danger of being noticed before entering Milas. Before his regression, he didn't have talent as a martial arts raider, but now it's different. His pursuer doesn't know he's changed classes. If noticed, Jaehyun doesn't know what he might try to do to stop him, and needs to keep things secret for now. His revenge has to be silent and discreet. He needs to become stronger in a way that his pursuer can't catch up to him, and wait for the right moment to cut his enemy's throat. Huiyan, in turn, wonders what he should do. He knows he couldn't have defeated all the enemies alone, and doesn't think it's right to take credit for what someone else did. But on the other hand, he thinks that with the money, he could better help with his mother's condition. He really wants to be an honorable raider, but he knows that if he doesn't treat his mother in time, she might die. Huiyan thinks he wouldn't be able to cope with that. The protagonist looks at Huiyan and concludes that his expression is too serious to be thinking about this just out of ego, and decides to help him make a decision. Then he tells Huiyan that his help was indeed significant, because if he had hesitated, someone might have lost their life, so he shouldn't feel like he doesn't deserve it. Huiyan thinks he's right. It wasn't something he should have hesitated over in the first place. If he loses someone important by overthinking, he wonders what meaning his dream would have. Then he tells the protagonist he'll repay him when the time comes. Seeing their conversation, Park Jae-hoon concludes that the protagonist is good at convincing people, and with everything settled, he says he'll proceed with the plan. So the protagonist says goodbye and leaves. Huiyan tells him, before he leaves, to at least share his name and contact number. He says Huiyan doesn't need to be so formal with him, as they're the same age. He also says that they're entering Mila's academy, so they'll see each other often there. Huiyan is impressed by this information. After that, Jaehyun finishes his preparations and presents himself for his first day at Mila's with his friend Kim Yoo-young. From afar, other students recognize Huiyan as the martial arts genius. They even say he's of a different breed. They also notice a beautiful girl and wonder who she is. The protagonist recognizes her. Her name is Seo Aina, and she's already attracting attention. As expected of someone who will be one of the top-ranked raiders, Jaehyun thinks it would be advantageous if he could bring her to his side, but she's different from the others. He knows he doesn't need to do this now, as he has the Saint Chu-sung, the alchemist Lee Jae-sang, and the famous genius Huiyan on his team. Kim Yoo-young interrupts him, saying she knows the girl is pretty, but staring at her like that is a bit creepy. The protagonist asks what she's talking about, and Seo Aina overhears their conversation. Then a man steps onto the stage and says it's a pleasure to meet the new students, introducing himself as President Gu Jae-in. Jaehyun thinks this is just the beginning, and he remembers that this was indeed the president's appearance. He looks at his friend, and remembers Kim Yoo-jung's past, telling her to stay strong, as he knows all that can happen at Mila's. However, Kim Yoo-young asks why he's suddenly worried about her, stating that she'll be fine. The protagonist knows that his friend ranked in the top 3 of the mage class, and he won't let her die this time. After this, the president announces the start of the entrance ceremony at Mila's academy. However, he says that's what he'd like to say, but he knows it would be boring for them. He says they should all know that at the Mila's entrance ceremony, a special event is prepared. A game where all students, old and new, try to steal each other's ID cards in an enclosed space. And now the hunt for the freshmen begins. A magic circle appears around them. Even Kim Young is frightened and almost falls to the ground. But the protagonist tells her it's dangerous to fall and holds her hand, preventing it from happening. The girl is startled at nearly falling. In another moment, at the guild headquarters, Sung Jae mentions that today is the protagonist's entrance ceremony. Yu Sung says time flew by, and she wanted to send an early good luck text to him, but she forgot, and now he won't see it if she sends it. She asks if it's still 3 days. Sung Jae says if she's referring to the freshman hunt, then yes, and it should happen in an enclosed space. The guild master concludes that she'll only be able to talk to him after that and regrets it. But Sung Jae says he knew she'd forget, so he sent the message on her behalf. Yu Sung asks what Jaehyun's reply was, and before Sung Jae shows the response, we return to the protagonist and his friend. They're extremely tired after a journey. However, the protagonist notices someone near them, a girl with dark hair and hazel eyes, with a magical aptitude of 92. Someone who will change the current perception of the magic class and will become an S-rank raider after her mentor, Seo Aina. The guild master observes the protagonist's response, telling her not to worry about him. At Milla's academy, in the central control room, one of the instructors mentions that there are some very talented cadets this year. He says that Huion is so promising he's even drawing attention abroad. Among the mages, the cadets Seo Aina, Kim Yoon, and Lee Soo-hyuk all scored 90 or above on the aptitude test. The profiles of cadets who changed their class haven't been updated yet. However, the director tells Kim Suk that if they change classes at this stage, there's no need to worry, as this isn't a place for indecisive people. The cadets who entered Milla's are talented, but even among them, there are those who stand out from the rest. With a simple talent, the director mentions Hwaeon. Common talents end up becoming stepping stones for geniuses in the end, so they don't need to give these cadets an opportunity. Sometimes, an awakened person facing an enemy they can't defeat or facing death is given another chance to awaken. The director also says that even if 100 C-rank raiders are discarded in the process, they must train one A-rank raider. A raider must constantly prove their courage. After all, those who fail in the process are the ones who haven't proven themselves worthy. The director's ideal is to gather all the beautiful gems to offer to him. Not able to delay things any longer, Jaehyun knows that the rookie hunt takes place in a space created by magic, the semi-plane, where things are possible that are not in reality, such as controlling the speed of time or removing spatial constraints, and in this space, approximately 5% of the cadets are defeated. This event is very challenging and demonstrates how limited their abilities are. Therefore, he concludes that he can't let his guard down for even a moment, especially near Seo Aina. The director appears on a screen and says he will now explain the rules of the rookie hunt. Within the semi-plane, the area where they are, only abilities below rank C can be used, and every time they steal someone's badge, they'll earn points. When a senior takes a rookie's badge, they receive a total of 10,000 points. On the other hand, when the opposite happens, the rookie receives 100,000, and these points can be used in any Milla's facility, so they better have plenty. The protagonist thinks that if it's limited to rank C or below, it's as good as having his electric chain, an A-rank ability, sealed. But the director didn't say anything about unique abilities. Finally, he bids farewell and wishes everyone a great day. He also mentions that all abilities used will only have a tenth of their power, for everyone's safety, so they shouldn't worry about getting hurt. Jaehyun isn't pleased with this, because the director not only didn't say anything about unique abilities but also about attribute limits, so his intent is obvious: to get rid of the weak and keep only the talented rookies. Then, Jaehyun tells his friend that they'll have to stay there for 3 days and need to find shelter for now. In this semi-plane, there are many things they can use to survive, such as traps that cause debuffs, a healing lake, and the nightmare forest. The ecosystem allows one to find food and shelter. Even with these resources, if they want to survive for 3 days, finding shelter is crucial. Jaehyun knows he needs a place to stay and make a plan in peace. His friend, however, interrupts him and asks if it's better to take the girl with them. Kim Yoo-young says she seems to be a cadet mage, and maybe it would be better to have someone else with them right now. The protagonist wonders why his friend only thinks logically at times like this. Having Seo Aina on their team would be great for him, but he concludes she's not a card he can control. Although everything he knows about her came from the news, that incident happened because Aina lost control in anger and harmed innocents. It's not something Jaehyun can decide easily, so he asks if his friend is sure that Seo Aina won't betray them. He notices that her stance is quite cautious around them and seems not to trust others much. Kim Yoo-young, however, has a different perspective and says that the girl reminds her a lot of her friend when they were younger. So, she approaches Seo Aina, even though Jaehyun insists she shouldn't. Kim Yoo-young approaches and says she's also a mage, and asks if Aina would like to go with them. she insists, saying that no matter how much the girl thinks about it, this event is disadvantageous for rookies, especially mages, since it's easier for them to fight when they have more mages together. But Seo Aina thinks they'll have to decide on that later. She notices someone approaching while they're talking. Two seniors appear, and Shinjun Sang says he never thought he'd find 3 rookies together. It seems like it'll be easy to score points this year. Kwon Soil says she only detected 2. She immediately looks at the protagonist and is startled, because she can't sense anything coming from him. Jaehyun, in turn, thinks they're very obvious. His friend says they're experienced warriors and asks if it's better for them to run away first. Jaehyun replies no, and that they need to fight them right there, as they won't be able to escape. From what he remembers, Kwon has a unique ability, a special skill that allows her to find any target within a radius of 300 kilometers. And if their group doesn't defeat them now, there's a chance they'll call others to attack them. Shinjun Sang only cares about scoring points to eat good food, but Kwon warns him not to be careless, as the boy has something strange about him. But Shinjun Sang says he's still just a rookie, and it's not like they haven't participated in this event once or twice. So he takes the lead and says he'll defeat them quickly. The protagonist just stands still and waits to be attacked, dodging easily. This leaves Shinjun Sang surprised. Kwon calls him an idiot and says she warned him that the boy had something strange about him. Jaehyun says it's been a while since someone tried to strike him with a sword. Angry, Shinjun Sang says he only got lucky as a beginner, and there's no way he wouldn't know of a rookie talented enough to dodge his strike. Scorning the protagonist, he continues attacking, but Jaehyun dodges all his blows effortlessly. Desperate and tired, Shinjun Sang wonders why he can't hit his target. Tired of playing, the protagonist blocks his opponent's sword and says he's not bad, but asks if he'll be able to survive with a physique like that. Then he breaks the sword with his hands as if it were paper. Seo Aina watches everything, surprised by Jaehyun's strength. Finally, the protagonist says that if Shinjun Sang leaves his badge now, he'll let him go, and gives him 3 seconds to decide. Shinjun Sang is scared and thinks it doesn't make sense, as the boy should just be another weak rookie in magic, and the way the protagonist looks at him is terrifying. Jaehyun says he clearly gave him a chance, and since he didn't flee, he'll have to endure it. Then he attacks the opponent, and Kwon is also frightened, knowing she might be next. After being hit, Shinjun Sang is disqualified. In the Milla's control room, one of the organizers mentions that finally the first fool is out. Then the speaker announces that participant Min Jaehyun has received 100,000 points. One of the teachers is surprised by this, as she imagined Huyan was responsible and not Min Jaehyun, and asks if there's something wrong with it. However, another responds that there isn't, and if there's any problem, they'll report it. But so far, everything is fine. The director watching everything seems to be enjoying himself. Back to the fight, Kwon Soil is still in disbelief over her partner's elimination. The protagonist tells his friend there's still 1 ID badge left, and sends her an invitation through the system to join his group. Kim Yoon accepts, but even she is surprised by her friend's strength. Seo Aina remains silent but is also watching closely. Kwon Soil thinks Shin was really an idiot, and blames him for her plans failing. She thinks that even if she's the strongest, she couldn't win a fight against 3, so she decides she at least needs to take down one of them before fleeing. She quickly charges toward them, aiming at Kim Yoon. The girl is surprised and tries to counterattack. Jaehyun thinks that wasn't a bad decision. After creating a desperate situation among them, Kwon will flee, and for her, it's a perfect plan. But the protagonist doesn't want to let that happen, and he wonders if the enemy is faster than him, as her mistake was thinking there's anyone weak enough here for them to worry about. Kim Yoon uses a slowing spell on the enemy. With that, Kwon tries to throw some knives in the direction of her target, but Kim Yoon conjures a magic shield and protects herself. Jaehyun knows that alone he won't be able to handle all of them at once, and will need help. He was about to attack, but he hears someone casting the sacred light of Alfheim, the sacred sword of the elves. He sees Seo Aina finally reacting, and knows this is her unique ability. With the sword of Alfheim, she attacks the enemy. Kwon is hit hard and says they're monsters. After that, the system confirms Kwon's elimination, and notifies that Kim Yoon received 50,000 points for assistance. Seo Aina also received 50,000 points and asks if she interfered with Kim, but the girl replies that she didn't and is fine thanks to her. This makes Seo Aina ask if the previous offer still stands. The protagonist thinks he needs to observe her a bit more. He thinks Aina is a suspicious stranger. However, he finds her interesting. Thus, a team of 3 with Jaehyun as leader is registered in the system. Then, they head together toward the Nightmare Forest. A group of trackers follows their footprints and realizes they must be inside the forest. One of them says a rookie defeated 2 experienced ones, so they should stop and monitor the area. Since the rookie hunt lasts 3 days, they won't stay in the forest all that time, and wonders when he'll get to see their pretty faces. However, they barely notice Kim Yoon nearby. Then, one of their group is hit, and quickly eliminated. Another group member notices some movement and sees Kim Young hiding among the trees. He then orders them to surround her, but Kim Young realizes there are 5 enemies in total and is serving as bait to lure them into a trap. She taunts them, saying they can't catch her and should be ashamed of being so slow. The group leader gets furious at her provocation, making Kim Young realize it's very easy to fool them. Earlier, the protagonist gathered his team and said this is the safest place around, but they can't stay long. Moreover, there's no food, and they still need to earn more points. Kim Young initially dislikes the idea, but Seo Aina seems to accept it. The protagonist says their strategy is to use this place to hunt the students. So Kim Young runs through the forest, but she passes by some mushrooms, and her system alerts her that a creature granting life bonuses is nearby. Exactly what she was looking for, because according to the plan, they need to lure enemies to the target and earn points and life bonuses. She activates her wind boost ability and leaves the enemies behind, saying the rest is up to Jaehyun. Kim thinks he must not fail, then enters the colony of paralyzing mushrooms. A few days before the rookie hunt, the protagonist sought out Lee Jae-sang because he wanted to know more about dealing with paralyzing mushrooms. Lee says the best way to handle them might be by using tree sap, and there's plenty in the Nightmare Forest. But that's the only way, so he advises Jaehyun not to get paralyzed. Jaehyun says that's enough and thanks him. Back in the present, the group leader tells them to stop running. The rest of the guys obey. Their systems alert them that they've all entered the paralyzing mushroom colony. They say this is dangerous and ask the leader if they should turn back. Jin Hyung sees an alert indicating a creature with abnormal status ahead, and also notices that the girl is already far from them. After discussing it, he says it's best to give up, but his group doesn't like having run all the way for nothing. One of them asks what would happen if they make a mistake and get eliminated, but he's reprimanded. The leader is furious that one of his own was eliminated by a rookie, and asks the scared one if he wants to join him. However, the group member says it's no use being stronger than the rookies and then ending up paralyzed by the mushrooms. With that, the leader says the mushroom area is 50 meters. So, the girl has the same chance as they do of being paralyzed. He points to one of the members and tells him to stay there in case the others get paralyzed, and orders the rest to follow him. Jin Hyung knows the girl is smart, and that she's luring them into a trap and then will attack them all at once. But he states that she's underestimating him, because it's not so easy to fool a senior. After running a bit, they catch up to Kim. The leader says that dealing with trash like her is a pain, and asks where she plans to run now. But Kim Yoon claims she's the one who caught all of them, and asks why they don't just surrender already. Angry, the leader shouts that he'll kill her and charges forward. But Kim Yoon was already expecting that. She detonates the mushrooms around, paralyzing everyone within a 50-meter radius. Before going out on the mission, Kim talks to her friend and says she needs something important from the trees. Jaehyun realizes that she knows as well. He says this is not just a survival test but also a test of intelligence, and they need to collect tree sap. Seo Aina mentions that their use of only C-rank skills limits them, forcing them to rely on their knowledge in any case. Jaehyun notes that this gives an advantage to martial artists with incredible mental skills. Kim adds that, unless they have unique abilities, their most useful attack skills have been sealed, and now they can only use enhancement magic. Her friend says he needs to come up with a plan, and asks if she's ever heard of swap. Kim responds that she has and that she also learned magic from Professor Lee. Seo Aina realizes the plan, saying that swap is a spell that changes the positions of a designated ally. Jaehyun says he's finished with the sap and can do something interesting. Back to the fight. The sound of the explosion can be heard from afar. Thus, Jaehyun knows they need to get ready. Seo Aina agrees with him. The group leader is paralyzed with the rest, and realizes the girl detonated the mushrooms. The system and Kim alert that the swap skill was activated. She then says her job there is done, and steps away from them. The protagonist says that now it's his turn. He charges directly at the leader, who is frustrated that he can't move. Jin Hyung says the protagonist was also affected by the mushrooms and can't defeat him. He also says he took precautions and left one of his teammates waiting outside the area. As soon as the effect wears off, he promises to kill him. But Jaehyun says he thinks his teammate won't be showing up. Jin Hyung asks what he means by that. In the forest, participant Song Hyun has been eliminated by Seo Ina's sword. She and her group earn 100,000 points. The group leader realizes this, and as the protagonist said, his teammate won't be helping him. He is frustrated and says they'll both be stuck in the same situation for 2 hours, insisting he'll get his revenge once the effect wears off. But Jaehyun disagrees with his opponent, saying he isn't paralyzed like him. Jin Hyung doubts how the protagonist can move. To him, it doesn't make sense, but Jaehyun tells him to start praying. The group leader is terrified, telling his opponent to back off. However, nothing prevents him from being defeated, and his entire group witnesses this. With Jin Hyung defeated, the protagonist and his group earn another 100,000 points. Then he prepares to take down the next one, and quickly finishes off all of them, scoring again. In the main hall, his achievements are being watched, but to some, it doesn't make sense. Back to Kim Young, she drinks some of the tree sap. Seo Ina asks if she's okay. Kim responds that she is. Then she says that the two of them need to go to the meeting point now, so they get ready to leave. And Seo Ina notices that Kim Young knows a lot about magic. The fact that she knows how to use swap magic is something Ina has never seen in any book. However, Kim Young says it's actually been less than 3 months since they started learning it seriously, and she was the one who taught the theory to her friend. She also mentions that Jaehyun wanted to be a warrior instead of a mage before. She says that only a few months ago did he become obsessed with learning magic, and before that, he didn't care about it at all. Additionally, she says she was impressed to learn that he knew about the effects of the tree sap, and wonders where Jaehyun learned that. After that, they meet up with him. Jaehyun asks if the paralysis effect has worn off, or if she got hurt anywhere. Kim replies that she didn't and that she ran using magic, leaving them behind. She asks how Ina is. She replies that she's fine. Kim tells Jaehyun that their team is the best, and he seems happy, asking if something good happened today. But Jaehyun tells her to stop making things up, seeing how close they are. Seo Ina says it's strange, but Jaehyun is actually kind of handsome. Suddenly, she realizes what she's thinking, and wonders where and why that thought came from, as she insists it's a mistake to think about others that way. Near the forest, the protagonist sets up camp. He uses some herbs in a cauldron. Seo Ina asks what he's doing. Jaehyun replies that he's preparing a healing potion, and learned it before coming here, in case someone ends up needing it, though he failed several times trying. Kim Young asks how he learned. As far as she knows, Jaehyun doesn't have many friends. However, he says she isn't the queen of socializing herself, but Kim insists she was telling the truth. Seo Ina says that sometimes Jaehyun seems older than them, and speaks as if he's lived 10 more years. The protagonist is surprised she deduced that just from his taste, and knows he really has lived 10 more years. Kim drinks the potion and says it tastes strange, asking if she'll have to drink it tomorrow too. She takes the initiative and says she'll cook herself. Jaehyun agrees but warns she'll have to cook with whatever they gather. His friend asks if he doesn't trust her. Speaking of trust, Jaehyun asks if she remembers the color of the cookies she made for him in elementary school. Kim replies that they were purple, and Ina quickly thinks she must have used blueberries. But Jaehyun says she just doesn't know how to cook, though he admits he doesn't either. Seo Ina says she knows how to cook a bit, and asks if he'd like her to prepare something. He asks if she can. Ina replies that she lived with her grandmother for a while and cooked with her every day. With that, she gets ready by tying her hair back. Jaehyun thinks he never knew much about the Seo family, and if she lived with her grandmother, it might mean Ina had some issue with her parents. The protagonist keeps this thought in mind, but soon Ina finishes cooking, and they both taste her food. Soon, they're quite pleased with the flavor. Kim Young says it's very good and even hugs her in thanks. Even Jaehyun is won over by the taste, saying he's never eaten anything so good before. Seo Ina feels embarrassed but is happy with the compliments, thinking it's been a while since she felt like this. In the Miller's control room, one of those in charge says that, as expected, Hwaeyeon is in 4th place. Still, it's unbelievable that the 1st and even the 2nd place are occupied by mages. The teacher asks if there might be a system error, as it doesn't make any sense. The director seems to be the only one pleased by this, saying that until now, only martial artists held the top spots in the rankings. The instructor asks about this situation. A team made up solely of mages, and on top of that, defeating the school's best warriors, leaves the director thrilled. He tells instructor Kim Ji-yeon to return to the mushroom scene. The director watches the scene again, and notices the confidence and audacity in a situation like that. The fact that the protagonist used paralysis as an advantage is impressive. Even so, he's a mage, and the director can't believe that a rookie is in 1st place. He pulls up the protagonist's file, but doesn't see much information. One of his staff says he found the profile of the student Min Jae-hyun, but thinks there's an error in his records. The director asks how that's possible. The staff member doesn't quite know what to say. Noticing his nervousness, the director tells him to calm down and explain what's going on. Then, the staff member says that Min Jae-hyun's percentage is 97%. The director is surprised by this information, as he checks that the protagonist's magical aptitude percentage is quite high by standard measures. Some become uneasy with the director's reaction, but he begins to laugh, saying this is excellent. Then he says he wants to see with his own eyes just how talented Min Jae-hyun can be. One of the advisors asks if the director will test him personally. He answers yes. He also sees Hwaeyeon on the screen, stating that he'll make things interesting around here. Back with the protagonist, he and his group make more kills and earn more points. His friend says they must have around 100 million points. Jaehyun thinks this is great, and should be enough to secure 1st place. Kim asks if they really have to leave. Jaehyun replies it's necessary, as the students are beginning to fear the forest and aren't advancing. Ina says he's right, and they should leave if they want to accumulate more points. Kim feels lazy but agrees to follow her group. She asks if her points are enough to secure a spot in the ranking. Ina thinks they are. The protagonist is surprised by CO Ina, finding her more interesting than he'd imagined, and with her, he's certain they'll win. He keeps this in mind and decides to move forward. However, a strange sound from the forest catches his attention. Jaehyun immediately goes on alert, and asks the girls to get ready. Then, an attack almost hits him, barely missing them as well. The protagonist knows something is coming and wonders if this power is truly a C-rank skill. Soon after, the system alerts that the subspace connection is unstable, and the restrictions limiting the participants have been temporarily lifted. Ina notices that this is strange, and Kim asks what's going on. However, Jaehyun says he didn't expect to see him so soon, referring to Hwaeon, who attacked him. But he notices that the boy seems off, and he's not responding. CO Ina tells Jaehyun to be careful because it seems like Hwaeon has gone mad, as if possessed by something. The protagonist remembers something from a long time ago. Before returning, something similar happened at the school festival. That was supposed to be a memorable day for the school freshmen, but the only thing carved into their minds was true chaos. The one behind it was a student's skill named Gu Jihin, known as mind control. In the end, all his crimes were exposed, and Gu Jihin was imprisoned. After the incident, he was never seen again, and there was no news about him. Many people died, a day that even terrified Gu Jihin himself. But for Jaehyun, it was the day he lost his best friend. Hwaeon seems to be under the same effect. He's equipped with a sword and shield, ready to attack. Jaehyun, however, thinks he needs to bring him back to his senses. He checks his system and sees a side mission that requires him to save Hwaeon from mind control, with a white card as the reward. The protagonist already has a strategy in mind, and Kim offers to help. However, he insists he'll be fine, and the two of them should leave immediately, and go as far as possible to try to score points without him. Kim doesn't understand and asks if Jaehyun knows what he's up against, stating that Hwaeon is a sword genius, but Jaehyun tells his friend to trust him. CO Ina watches from a distance, and realizes that the protagonist has a plan, so she tries to convince Kim to follow his instructions, even though Kim is reluctant. Seeing CO Ina's determination, Kim agrees and says they'll try to earn some points at least. Before leaving, she tells her friend not to get hurt, and hopes he manages to take down the opponent and get his ID badge. Jaehyun says it won't take long. A flashback shows Hwaeon earlier. He was defeating some opponents and accumulating points, with around 600,000 according to his count. Somehow, he survived for 2 days and thinks that if he stays there for one more, his life outside might end too. He checks the ranking and feels frustrated for working so hard and not being in first place. But he thinks that the first place should fall soon because the magic of this world is limited. Even his team, at the top, should fall. Hwaeon remembers the last time he met the protagonist, and thinks he's really cool. He wants to rest a bit while there's still time, but also thinks he won't lose this competition. While lost in his thoughts, the director appears on the big screen. Hwaeon doesn't know what the director wants from him, but then the man says he has a special favor to ask of Hwaeon, just a small request. Meanwhile, Hwaeon's eyes begin to glow. He even lets his equipment drop to the ground. His system alerts that his consciousness is under someone else's control, and he's terrified. Hwaeon doesn't know what to do as his mind falls into a state of confusion, but he suddenly changes behavior, claiming to know exactly what to do. Then he goes to where the protagonist was, and launches a ranged attack. Back to the present moment, Jaehyun dodges the attack. He observes the enemy's move, and identifies an A-rank skill, Void Slash. Hwaeon charges toward him, but Jaehyun dodges easily. He thinks that the last time he saw the boy, he hadn't reached this level. Somehow he's improved a lot. Jaehyun doesn't know how he allowed his mind to be invaded like this. Thinking it's strange, Hwaeon pushes him far away, but the protagonist manages to move without getting hurt, and his wind boost skill is activated. With it, Jaehyun moves quickly, and approaches from behind his opponent. Jaehyun prepares to launch a surprise attack, as he notices his opponent's back is turned to him. However, with a counterattack, Hwaeon breaks away and distances himself from the protagonist. Jaehyun is surprised that his surprise attack failed. His target disappeared amidst the smoke. With this, he realizes that Hwaeon's body reacted before he could even track his movements with his eyes, concluding that Hwaeon indeed has an excellent fighting instinct, and it won't be as easy as he thought. Jaehyun considers that he could simply resolve the brainwashing using absolute control, but knows that people are watching him, even if the instructors don't notice. The director is likely in control of the boy, wanting to see what he's capable of, and Jaehyun even guesses the old man might be laughing right now. However, he wonders if the director will be disappointed if things end his way, and decides to give him the show he wants, saying that the price he'll pay for it will be high. In the main room, The instructor wonders if this is really happening or if it's a dream, because magic users were never able to fight martial artists head-to-head before, and she asserts that the protagonist is underestimating his opponent, or he'll truly defeat the sword genius. She herself can hardly believe it, but she wonders who the protagonist is, knowing that magic cannot defeat martial arts. She states that she's always seen this happen in the magic world and thinks the protagonist must be hiding something from them, wondering what makes him different. The director has the same question. Back in the fight, Hoi-an is bleeding. Jae-hyun says he barely touched him yet, and since he's strong, he should recover soon. But that's not what Jae-hyun wants. Then he activates the light bomb ability. With this, all the screens go blind. Inside the control room, everyone is confused about what happened. Even the academy director is frantic, wanting to know what's going on. But all the cameras spread around are blinded. One of the instructors says that the protagonist must have used an ability that's blocking the view of the subspace. The director asks if it was the light bomb. She confirms it was. Then he calls instructor Kim Suki and tells him to deal with Jae-hyun, and when it's over, he'll be waiting in his office. Kim Suki says that if they keep interfering in the event, something bad might happen. However, the director approaches him and repeats the order, saying they can't allow the protagonist to change the results they've always had, and asks what he thinks will happen if a magic-using student wins the event. With this, the director says he hopes the instructor understands, asserting that if Suki doesn't want to lose his position there, he'd better obey. Hoi-an is left dazed after the intense light exposure. He's completely out of combat. The protagonist realizes his ability had the desired effect, and approaches his opponent. Upon reaching Hoi-an, he places his hand on his head, using the universal derivation ability. With this, he removes the brainwashing effect, and Hoi-an regains consciousness. Jae-hyun asks if he feels better. Hoi-an tries to get up from the ground, but starts feeling sharp pains in his body. The protagonist apologizes but says Hoi-an attacked him first. Hoi-an doesn't remember anything. Jae-hyun tells him he was hit with a mind control spell. The boy tries to recall what happened. Amidst a distorted image, he thinks he heard a voice. Hoi-an says that this type of magic is always S rank or above, even the simplest ones, and thought there was a rank C and below magic restriction. Jae-hyun says he isn't sure, but thinks it might be a system bug or someone interfered in the event. Even if there was an issue in the semi-plane, not many students could use mind control magic at this level. Hoi-an asks if the protagonist has any idea who did it and why. Jae-hyun knows the answer well, but chooses to keep it to himself, answering that he doesn't. He just says that if someone has a skill like that, they're surely in a high position. Once someone experiences things like this at Milla's, they start to realize certain things, one of them being who the real Gu Jian is. The protagonist's system alerts him that he completed the mission of rescuing the out-of-control cadet, and that he also received a blank card as a reward. Hoi-an still feels pain in his body, but notices that the protagonist is perfectly fine, wondering if this is his limit. After getting up, he apologizes. Jae-hyun says there's no need to apologize and that it's all fine. Now that Hoi-an can move, he says he's going to leave. Before that, Hoi-an hands his badge to the protagonist. Jae-hyun says that if Hoi-an is left without a badge, he'll be disqualified. However, Hoi-an says it's fine. Besides, he didn't score as many points as Jae-hyun, but he already has enough. Not only that, but since Hoi-an lost, he thinks it's only right for Jae-hyun to keep his badge. However, he says that, although he lost today, it will be different at the Academy Festival, and he'll defeat him to reclaim his badge. With that, he's eliminated, giving points to the protagonist and his group. Jae-hyun feels satisfied with this gesture, and wishes the boy good luck. But the protagonist thinks it's different for him because martial arts talent was something he greatly desired in his past. A guy with incredible martial arts talent recognized him. He's been through a lot since his return, but what he's feeling now is something enjoyable. Jae-hyun thinks that, for the first time, he felt like he made progress, leaving behind the past, where he didn't advance, and now focusing only on the future, taking one step at a time. This is a new beginning for him, as he now intends to follow his path. A little later, the system alerts that the 72 hours of the Rookie Hunt event have passed, and Jae-hyun has scored over 1.5 million points, breaking the competition record. After returning to the real world, several defeated participants are lying down, sore. The protagonist, however, can only think about the number of points he earned and says it wasn't so bad. His friend scolds him, saying he broke the record and should be happy. She asks if CO Aina agrees, but Aina can only think that if she had one more hour, she could have hit the 1.6 million mark. Kim says they're strange, but that they'll live luxuriously with the points they earned. Jae-hyun says that if they multiply the points by 10, that's the amount in real money. So, basically, they just earned about 10.5 million won. The two are impressed. Jae-hyun says he got first place, and they tied for second, so he thinks he'll get bonus points. Kim is even more surprised, and Jae-hyun says it could be about 1 million. She gets super excited about this, and celebrates with Seo Aina for winning so many points. Jaehyun feels embarrassed by the two, as he notices everyone staring at him. But amid the crowd, a man appears and greets them, introducing himself as instructor Kim Suki. He says he has something to discuss with them, but he can't say it there, so he invites them to go somewhere else. However, the protagonist asks if it's related to the event. Kim Suki thinks before answering, and then says yes. Aina asks where they're going. Jaehyun already knows and says it's the director's office. He then asks if he's right. Seriously, Kim Suki replies that he is. Immediately after, he calls out the students' names, stating that the director wants to speak directly with them. Upon arriving at the office, Jaehyun asks where the director is, since they came all the way there just because he wanted to see them. But he's not present. The two girls wonder what's wrong. Then, Kim Suki tells them to sit and wait for the director, and so the two do. A while later, the director appears, saying he's a bit late. Kim Yoo-young stands up and introduces herself formally, followed by Seo Aina. The director says he knows who they are. Jaehyun is the only one who doesn't introduce himself, simply saying that the director is late, and that he almost fell asleep waiting, his lack of manners shocking his friends. Even the instructor is surprised, wondering if the protagonist is crazy. The director, meanwhile, holds himself back, but he simply says he's a bit embarrassed, and was preparing for this conversation. But Jaehyun says they're the ones embarrassed, since they spent 4 days in the subplane without taking a shower before coming there, and didn't have time to prepare. Although irritated, the director tells Jaehyun not to worry about that. The protagonist thinks that's how the director is going to act, wondering if he still fawns over talented students. The director explains that he has prepared a great offer for them, asking not to be hated for being late. First, he congratulates them, saying they are elite students for making it into the top 3 of the rookie hunt. And Jaehyun got first place, but he says he only succeeded thanks to his team and wouldn't have managed without them. With this, the director concludes that Jaehyun doesn't want to boast about his talent. Then the director says that's true, and he watched their performance in the event. But he says that's not all, as Jaehyun easily broke the previous points record, stating that this is impressive and an unbelievable milestone. The girls are grateful for the compliment. However, Jaehyun insists the director get to the point. So, the director says that Mila's Academy would like to give them some special rewards. He says that, first, Mila's suites will be provided to them for free. Second, they'll have priority use privileges in all Academy facilities. And third, whenever a test result is unsatisfactory, they'll have the opportunity to retake it to improve their score. After saying this, the director asks what they think, and says that, along with these 3 special rewards he just offered, they'll also receive a partnership contract with Mila's. Immediately, the protagonist declines the offer. The director freezes at his response. Jaehyun states that these seem like good things, but the rewards are all privileges they could earn with a month's hard work. He adds that since the Academy prioritizes a person's abilities above all, he doesn't understand why the director wants to offer a contract and even pay a signing bonus for it. However, Jaehyun wants to read the contract, and sees that one of the clauses states that, after signing with Mila's, while working as one of their raiders, for 5 years, 30% of their earnings would go to the Academy. With this, he tells the director that this isn't a rewards contract, but more like a slavery contract, but asks if he misunderstood. Displeased, the director realizes he can't do anything, given Jaehyun's thoughts, since a contract can't be forced, so he'll let the 3 decide for themselves. The 2 girls exchange glances, and decide to decline the contract as well. The director doesn't want to show his dissatisfaction, and simply says that their decision is a shame, since it was the best offer he could make to them, but he says he'll give them another chance, in case they're uncertain about anything. Then he looks at Jaehyun and asks if he's changed his mind. However, he attempts to use his mind control ability on the protagonist. Jaehyun had anticipated something like this and was prepared, as his system alerts him that the blessing of hell blocked the intrusion. Not only did he manage to resist the mind control, but he also copied the ability with a blank card, thinking that provoking the director was a good decision. So, he stands up and says he's leaving. His system registers the unique ability card, named Mind Control, with all the original benefits. Jaehyun calls his friends to leave and says he's starving, as spending 4 days in the semi-plane wasn't easy. The boy's arrogant attitude makes Suki break out in a cold sweat. Before leaving, Kim Yoo-young says a formal goodbye, followed by Seo Aina, who also bids farewell. The director is left alone in the room, with instructor Kim Suki. He tells the instructor he can leave. Once alone, the director thinks that a student was able to resist his unique ability, and considers that Jaehyun is indeed an interesting boy. Later, Jaehyun reunites with his friends, and asks if they're sure they'll be alright. Kim asks what he means by that, and he mentions that they also declined the offer. The girl says she liked what she heard at first, but what Jaehyun said is true, and she was sure the director was trying to trick them with smooth talk, assuming they were too young to understand things. Aina also says the contract seemed unfair and thinks it was wise to refuse. Besides, if they start getting privileges, people will begin to resent them. And even if it takes some time, it's better if they achieve things on their own. Jae-hyun is pleased with this, and is surprised, as hearing this from her makes her completely different from the person he thought she was before his regression. Being honest, Jae-hyun says he hoped they'd refuse. Kim mentions that the director was acting strange, especially when Jae-hyun rejected the offer. Seo Aina says she felt afraid too, and adds that, regarding the incident in the semi-plane, neither the director nor the instructor mentioned it. Jae-hyun appreciates her intuition. Then Aina asks if Jae-hyun knows anything about the director. The protagonist hesitates for a moment, and asks what made her think that. Seo Aina says he was very calm for a first-year student, but when he started talking to the director, he acted rudely. Kim Yoo-young notices this too and tells Jae-hyun to share what he knows. However, he admits he's not sure what's true or not, so it's hard to make any claims. But he can say one thing: they shouldn't trust anyone, even if it's the director or any other instructor. Aina asks if that applies to him as well. The protagonist hesitates to answer. However, Kim Yoo-young tells Aina not to trust him, saying he's bad and even abandons friends in the middle of the street. Jae-hyun, however, tells her not to bring up things from the past. But Kim still hasn't forgotten what he did, saying she almost got lost being alone that time. The protagonist says that's enough, and that the sun has already set. Kim realizes it's true. Seo Aina, on the other hand, feels a bit sad, thinking that now everyone will go to their own rooms. An awkward atmosphere falls between them, but Kim breaks the ice, saying they're being silly and that she wants to join in too. However, Jae-hyun says that the female dorms are on the left, and the male dorms on the right, so she should go and rest. Aina says she'll go too and tells him to rest up, since tomorrow is the first day of class. Jae-hyun agrees and says they'll see each other the next day. After saying goodbye to the girls, Jae-hyun heads to his room. However, it's not his first time there. He recognizes the musty smell, and the creaky floor that hasn't been renovated in years. The atmosphere of misery left by the talentless student who lived there for a while. It reminds him that it's been a long time since he felt this way, and he thinks he'll have to find another place to stay after tomorrow's classes, as going through that hell once was enough. The day dawns, and quite early, the protagonist goes out for a run. After finishing his warm-up, he feels ready to start, and should head back to get ready for the first class. After that, he goes to the location of the first class, accompanied by his two friends. Then the instructor, who handles basic mana adaptation, greets them, and says her name is Kim Ji-yeon, hoping to get along with everyone. Jae-hyun doesn't remember her from his past life. Even considering the fact that she was a warrior in the past, he has few memories of her as an instructor. It likely means she's one of the instructors who will leave soon, and it won't take long for Jae-hyun to find out. Becoming an instructor at Milla's isn't easy. It's something most awakened ones know. The instructors who are still at Milla's are like Suki, who fell into greed by taking the scraps the director was willing to give. Then instructor Ji-yeon says she's sure they must be wondering why the first class isn't being held in a classroom, but rather in a large facility like this. The reason for this is quite simple. After she opens the door, everyone is surprised. Ji-yeon says this is to test their mana sensitivity. Soon, the students identify a mana cube and feel nervous about entering it, wondering if it will be challenging from the start. However, the protagonist notices this cube looks like one he entered before, but this one has much less mana. The instructor says that what they see now is called a mana room and was created based on a mana cube that can be found in guilds. For cadets like them, it's almost impossible to get out of a mana cube. So, what Milla's prepared is this, and as they can see, this mana room is divided into various subscales. The level of the first mana room is similar to our atmosphere, but as they progress, the mana becomes increasingly dense. She explains that, on average, first-year cadets at Milla's Academy can reach level 3. A graduate cadet can reach close to level 7. In this class, they'll discover their level of mana sensitivity. Seo Aina feels apprehensive about discovering her limit. The instructor directs the cadets to form a line behind her, and if they have any problems during the test, they should raise their hands so they can exit the room with the assistant instructors. Now, she'll begin the test. The instructor enters, followed by her students. At level 1, everyone seems fine, so she moves on to level 2 with them. Immediately, some already start to feel short of breath. However, she guides them to level 3. For the protagonist and his friends, the situation feels normal. But the instructor notices that half have already asked to leave and proceeds to level 4. Then, she advances to levels 5 and 6, and at each one, students ask to leave. Several give up along the way. Kim asks her friend if he's also feeling like it's hard to breathe, but he replies that he isn't. Seo Aina notices that Jae-hyun is doing very well, and wants to try advancing a bit further. The instructor notices that only 4 cadets remain. The protagonist, his friends, and another named Lee Soo-hyuk. She knows they are the ones who ranked at the top in the rookie hunt event, in particular, Cadet Min Jae-hyun, and she knows the director had reasons for telling them to keep an eye on him and report anything they learn. But the instructor doesn't plan on easily following those orders. Then, she continues to level 7. The other students ask if the 4 of them are made of steel, since the instructor mentioned that only graduates could reach level 7. The instructor, before moving to the next level, asks if anyone is struggling, but none of them respond. So, she decides to keep going. The spectators notice that the 4 have already reached level 8. The instructor advances to the next level, and 3 of them are already showing signs of fatigue, except for the protagonist, who shows no sign of wanting to stop. He knows that from level 8 onward, the mana density changes constantly, just like inside a dungeon. Even if he's a genius, he'll start having problems from this point on. His friend Kim Hee-young and Lee Soo-hyuk have already given up, and Seo Aina is on the verge of quitting as well. The instructor decides to proceed to level 9, and the protagonist notices that Aina is already exhausted. As they advance, Aina begins to feel unwell, and the protagonist becomes concerned for her. Instructor Jaehyun feels it too, but she was previously instructed not to offer help unless the students ask for it, no matter what situation a cadet faces. The director said that danger is nothing but a new opportunity for a cadet, and if that opportunity is taken away before their eyes, it would be heartbreaking. However, Instructor Jaehyun thinks that's pure nonsense. Concerned for his friend, Jaehyun asks if Aina is okay, but due to the mana density, she starts to pass out. She pushed herself too hard because she didn't want to lose. Until now, everyone has told her the same thing, that in today's world, only the strong survive. And even though she has talent for magic, she won't be able to do anything but bow to a warrior. Seo Aina thinks that the weak have no future. This is the only place where she can gain knowledge. But again, she berates herself for failing. She is then taken away on a stretcher. Jaehyun hears her say she lost and is intrigued. His instructor says that from now on, it's level 10. And even she begins to falter. With this, she asks if the protagonist is okay. He replies that he's feeling unwell and would like to leave. The instructor then asks him to accompany her, but she realizes this was a flimsy excuse. Otherwise, he wouldn't be breathing normally. Outside, Kim Ji-yoon calls for applause for Cadet Jaehyun, who managed to reach level 10. This means he's at the same level as a rank B raider or possibly higher. Everyone should give their all and try to reach the same level as him. The protagonist, however, is only concerned with Ina's condition. She apologizes for worrying her friends, and Kim reveals that the doctors said this is a common symptom of mana poisoning, and thinks they did too much for the first day. Jaehyun says he's glad nothing more serious happened, and Kim asks if he's okay, since a while ago he seemed to be a bit off, but Jaehyun insists he's fine and asks his friend to take that towel off her neck. The girl gets annoyed because she was worried about him, and now he's making a joke. On a serious note, he asks if Kim is okay and if she isn't feeling any pain, but she says that's not the case, as she doesn't feel any pain. Jaehyun thinks that's good. Looking at Seo Aina, he thinks she's just competitive, but there's something different about her, obsession, and it seems to be something more compulsive. Fortunately, she wasn't hurt this time, but with this attitude, it will be challenging to control her later. Not that Jaehyun wants to manipulate her, but since the moment he met her, like with Hoyeon and Jae-sang, there's a great chance that Ina's future could change. This also applies to Kim Yi-young. Kim notices Jaehyun staring at her and asks if she's that beautiful, but he asks if she's really okay, because saying something like that must mean she hit her head. Jaehyun doesn't know what effect his actions will have in the future, in this ever-changing environment. If he wants to stay one step ahead of everything, he must prepare for it. So he thinks he'll speed things up a bit. But before he can move, Kim grabs him with her towel and demands he repeat what he said. Jaehyun realizes his friend has sharp ears, and knows he has to keep his mouth shut around her. With that, he decides to use the towel to mess up Kim's hair. The girl gets very angry, and asks if he has any idea how long she spent fixing her hair that morning. However, Jaehyun says that fixing her hair didn't change anything. Furious, Kim asks if he just called her ugly. Now the protagonist realizes he messed up. Kim runs toward him, seeking revenge, and Jaehyun flees, leaving her behind. She says she needs to go to the infirmary but thinks Jaehyun will have to go too. Seo Aina admires their friendship, and notices they are very close. Lee Soo-hyuk sees the protagonist running, and wonders how he reached level 10. One of his friends asks what he's thinking about. Lee Soo-hyuk tells his friend to tell him everything he knows about the protagonist. Minsa asks if he's his servant or something and also asks if he really knows nothing about Jaehyun, stating that discovering other cadets' strengths is also part of what they need to do at the academy. But Lee says he wants to know where Jaehyun is from. However, his friend can't say. He says that no matter how much he thinks about it, nothing makes sense because there's something strange about Jaehyun, and Lee is sure he's hiding something. But Minsa says he's still not used to it, and claims that Jaehyun has already proven himself twice, and asks what more Lee wants. Then he says it's possible to cheat here. After all, they're at Milla's. Lee says there's no way someone is stronger than him without cheating. His friend is stunned by Lee's self-assurance, and thinks he wouldn't win against Seo Aina or Kim Yeon, let alone Jaehyun. Minsa tells his friend to think carefully, saying that even if he reincarnated 80 times, he wouldn't beat Jaehyun. Lee Soo-yeok doesn't like the response much, and his friend thinks he's crazy, chasing after him and asking Lee to wait. The day passes, and night falls. In a video call, the protagonist speaks with Yoo-sung and asks if she called to hear what happened in the rookie hunt. She confirms this, saying it's better to hear directly from him. Jaehyun says she must have guessed the result, but tells her he came in first place. Then he hears a voice saying, as expected, he was amazing. Jaehyun asks if Park Sung-jae is with her. Yoo-sung replies that he is, and that the manager was happy to hear it. She also noticed that the environment he's in is pretty good for a rookie and asks if he earned a lot of points. Finally, Yoo-sung congratulates him, saying he made the best first step at Milla's academy, which is known to be difficult to survive in. As his teacher, she says she's very proud, and Jaehyun thanks her, adding that he was worried she'd kill him if he came in second place. His teacher asks if there were any cadets who caught his attention during the hunt. Jaehyun asks if she's thinking of recruiting them. She replies that she is and plans to give a reward for any information he provides. The protagonist doesn't mind this, but just imagining he'll get a reward for it, he asks if she's being too generous. Yoo-sung says it's because she knows that, in the future, he won't cooperate even if she offers 10 times what she's offering now. Jaehyun says he'll talk then. He mentions the mage Seo Aina, his friend Kim Yeon, and the warrior An Hoyeon. These three are the cadets who could be recruited by Manhwa. Jaehyun also mentions knowing a student named Lee Jae-sang from the upper classes who would be good to recruit, and asks what she thinks. The guild master says she'll welcome him. Finally, she says she'll hang up first, and Jaehyun says goodbye. Lee Jae-sang. The master knows this name as well and knows he's the youngest son of S-rank raider Lee Jae-sin. The protagonist confirms. Yoo-sung says Lee Jae-sang isn't as talented as his siblings, and she's heard he doesn't get much attention in his family. But she knows family is family. If her guild recruits him, it could cause some friction with the boys' guild. Even with this risk, she asks if the protagonist still wants them to recruit him. Jaehyun responds yes, saying it's worth the risk, because he believes Lee Jae-sang will become the best alchemist in the future. The guild master is pleased to hear this. After ending the call, the manager says that Baek Jae-hyun has arrived, so she tells him to let her in. After a while, the girl arrives, and enters the guild master's office. A guild companion enters and greets the manager. He keeps his serious demeanor, but the guild master says she arrived at just the right time. Baek Jae-hyun arrives and says that time is also a valuable asset for a merchant, and it's been a while since she last saw the guild master. Yoo-sung, though polite, says they aren't close enough for such casual greetings, but she asks her to sit, and inquires what the healing guild master wants with her. Baek Jae-hyun comments that Yoo-sung is straightforward and says it seems getting close to her will be challenging, but things like this don't stress her out. Yoo-sung suggests they cut down on wasted time, and asks why Baek is there. Baek mentions that recently it seems Manhwa has been taking good care of someone, and asks how valuable the boy is to Yoo-sung. But Yoo-sung is surprised by this question. Yoo-sung replies that it's unfortunate, but the Manhwa guild doesn't view its members as commodities that can be bought or sold, and tells Baek to look elsewhere. Baek asks if the boy thinks the same. Yoo-sung asks if she realizes there are things that money can't buy, and thinks Baek doesn't understand that. Baek says she didn't really expect Yoo-sung to make an offer, and also says she doesn't care. Then she adds that she only came by to let Yoo-sung know that she needs to be more polite, since her current manners are extremely inappropriate. Baek remarks that it's truly unfortunate, and since it's getting late, she says she'll take her leave, as it seems her host isn't interested in talking much. Yoo-sung thanks her for noticing. Baek clearly gets the hint, and says it's the basic trait of a good salesperson. The next day, it's time for the endurance test results, and the academy students wait eagerly, including the protagonist who, like the others, stands in front of the screen to see his results. However, when the results come out, he's in second place behind Hoyeon. This frustrates him, saying that, as expected, he can't compare to warrior geniuses. He doesn't consider second place a bad result, and thinks he doesn't need to rush just yet. But it's also true that he hasn't reached his goal. Hoyeon also appears to check his results. The protagonist shows no reaction, and his friends find this strange. Kim Yeon asks her friend if he's still human. He's confused, and the girl asks how a mage raider managed to get second place in a test like this, and only lost to An Hoyeon, wondering how it's possible. Jaehyun replies that it's not strange, since at first, he wanted to be a warrior. Kim realizes this is true. Then the protagonist tells his friend to focus solely on magic, and asks if she's never heard the popular saying, "Healthy citizens make a strong country." However, Kim gets annoyed at the teasing and swears she'll kill him one day. The instructor for the day's class approaches and sees the protagonist, saying he really does seem as dangerous as the director warned. His muscular endurance isn't something a mage usually possesses, and wonders what the protagonist is. Seo Aina holds Kim back so she doesn't attack her friend. But Jaehyun mentions that the next class is about to start, so Kim starts to behave, and the instructor arrives to begin the class, saying that the second endurance test is the augmented reality evasion test. Jaehyun remembers that, before his regression, this was a test many cadets took to analyze and discover their talent limits. The instructor explains that this place, where Mila's Academy's best facilities are integrated, is called the Augmented Reality Testing Room. This is where the evasion test will be conducted officially. Kim Yoo-young is uncertain about the evasion test, but the instructor confirms it, and simply put, this combat measurement system will test them via virtual battles with AR-generated opponents, and assess the skills of all the cadets. Jaehyun concludes that they don't intend to make it easy. The instructor says that normally they would need to eliminate the materialized monsters from drones while analyzing their attack patterns, but since they've already done the endurance test today, they'll focus only on evaluating their evasion skills, and if they defeat the monsters, they'll get a higher result. Jaehyun thinks this is true, since being a raider usually means working in places where people hunt monsters and search for equipment, elixirs, or artifacts. For this reason, raiders without offensive power are useless. The students receive an item, and Kim Yoo-young realizes they are headphones. Jaehyun explains that actually it's a receiver, a device that analyzes and records combat simulations. The instructor confirms this and adds that Cadet Jaehyun seems to be well informed. He goes on to say that it's a receiver used to implement augmented reality, stimulating the brain to create illusory monsters. An augmented reality combat system, utilizing cameras and drones and 3D images generated in the surroundings, simulating a real monster in front of the person. This device is meant to ensure the user's safety. Although the monsters are virtualized, they are just illusions, so there's no chance of getting hurt. That's why the receiver stimulates the brain, allowing it to feel only 1/5 of the opponent's attack. However, the purpose isn't to stimulate the cadets, but rather to create a certain level of danger, to increase their chances of survival in a dungeon. The augmented reality system has a total of 100 levels, and they can choose manually, the instructor explains. But today, he wants to evaluate them up to level 10, and the test will be done in teams of 4, called in order to take the assessment. Thus, the instructor begins the test. The protagonist is in Team 3, composed of 2 warrior girls, and 2 mages, including him. With that, Jaehyun concludes that the team is well balanced. Lee Soo-hyuk is placed in his team, and asks if the protagonist is Min Jaehyun. He replies that he is. Lee Soo-hyuk says he heard that the protagonist took first place in the rookie hunt, but there's something he still doesn't understand. He asks how a mage managed to come in first place, stating that he believes there was a special reason behind it, and asks how Jaehyun achieved it. However, Jaehyun responds that he can't explain something that didn't happen. Lee Soo-hyuk doesn't like the answer, and says he'll make the protagonist talk by force. Jaehyun asks why, and Lee Soo-hyuk says he made it clear from the start. The protagonist realizes that Lee just wants an excuse to fight him, and Lee Soo-hyuk, in turn, says they're starting to understand each other. One of the girls in the team asks why the two are acting this way since they're on the same team. The other doesn't know, but thinks they'll really fight. She then tries to intervene before that happens. Shortly after, the instructor calls for Team 3, and tells them to head to the area. Lee Soo-hyuk doesn't seem too pleased with this, but he follows the group, and all 4 introduce themselves. The system alerts everyone that the level 1 augmented reality evasion test will begin in 5 seconds, and as soon as the countdown ends, an alert is issued that a skeleton soldier has appeared. Lee Soo-hyuk thinks he should go first. However, when he looks to the side, he's surprised because the protagonist has already gone ahead. Even the girls are surprised, saying it's dangerous to advance like that. Lee asks what he's doing, and why he thinks a mage should fight on the front line. The protagonist, however, never thought they'd underestimate him so much. For him, there's no other way. The best thing is to show a bit of his skills. Thus, he attacks the monster, giving it no chance to react. His attack explodes the skeleton soldier, and Jaehyun already targets the next one. His team is amazed by his skills. Even the test instructor is taken aback. Not only them, but everyone else is watching from outside, including his friends. In the arena, more skeleton soldiers appear. However, this is no problem for Min Jaehyun. He advances towards the creatures, attacking them mercilessly. Jaehyun even increases his speed, and activates his mana weapon skill. This is a special skill that a typical mage cannot use. They think it's something useless, that it only allows a mage to cause physical damage. But it's not useless for Jaehyun. Lee Soo-hyuk watches from a distance, and compares the protagonist to a psychopath. The girls in his team can't believe what they're seeing. Jaehyun completed the level 1 evasion test alone, earning additional points as his contribution level was 100%. Then, level 2 begins, and a Draug appears in the arena. Jaehyun says he hasn't seen one of those in a while. Shortly after, the arena is thoroughly destroyed, and the system alerts that the team has completed the augmented reality evasion test up to level 10. The time record for completing the evasion test was broken. Lee can't believe something like this. For his part, the protagonist judges his high performance as satisfactory, thinking that his body felt lighter when he started using the combat techniques Yu Sung taught him, which he considers good. But she always gets really excited when she teaches him. For Jaehyun, this is a bit intimidating, but his teacher's skills are exceptional. Then, Lee Soo-hyuk appears once more, determined to bother him again, and asks what trick the protagonist used. He replies that he only did what was necessary. However, Lee asks if it was necessary to leave the defensive line, feeling suspicious since Jaehyun defeated everyone on his own. He insists that doing something like that is impossible without using some trick. However, Jaehyun states that he doesn't have time to talk and has nothing to hide. Lee Soo-hyuk isn't satisfied with this, but Jaehyun tells him not to make him repeat himself, and says that if he's that curious, he can see it firsthand. With that, Lee becomes hesitant to continue confronting him. From a distance, the instructor intervenes and asks if the two have a problem. Then he thinks he needs to calm down, and tries to convince himself that if no one was watching, he would do something. But both know that this isn't true, and Jaehyun walks away. Lee Soo-hyuk tells the protagonist not to think he's won. Jaehyun stops for a moment, and says he doesn't think he's lost either. Lee insists on challenging him, stating they'll fight at the Miller's Academy festival. However, the protagonist doesn't agree, leaving Lee Soo-hyuk furious with him. Jaehyun just says he already has other plans. In another moment, at his house, Hwaeyeon apparently overheard their conversation. The fact that the protagonist refused to face Lee and said he has other plans makes him think that Jaehyun wants to fight him, since Hwaeyeon had said that at the Miller's Academy festival, he would defeat him and take back his badge. But he quickly concludes that now is not the time to act that way, and thinks it's better to go train, because he can't disappoint him. Back at Miller's Academy, the instructor is accompanied by some guards, and one of them mentions the results of this year's evasion test. Another says he monitored the test for a while and that the cadets this year are good. He even heard that the record was broken by a cadet mage named Min Jaehyun, wondering if that's possible. The instructor thinks that Jaehyun isn't just very talented. His movements while fighting on the front line as only a mage are impressive, even for someone who has instructed other students. Then, they go to the director's office. Gu Jian, watching everything on the screen, says they did a good job, and already wants to start discussing this year's evasion test results. In the director's office, Instructor Kim Suki reveals that there are a total of 3 cadets who achieved the maximum score. An Hwaeyeon, Min Cha-yeon, and Jaehyun. The director thanks him for the information, saying he did an excellent job. He stares at the protagonist on his screen, having closely observed his performance, and it pleased him greatly. He says he hopes the instructor will continue informing him of all of Min Jaehyun's actions and grades, and to alert him as soon as possible if he starts acting strangely. That's all for today, says the director, and orders them to inform the other instructors to prepare for the next event. As soon as they leave his office, the director returns to watching the protagonist's test recording. Speaking of Jaehyun, the system alerts that he completed the augmented reality evasion test at level 27. He knows that this is currently his maximum. At this difficulty, a group of 6 C-rank raiders should complete it without problems, which means he is already at that rank. So the next event is the dungeon practice. Soon, Jaehyun needs to prepare. The dungeon practice incident, one of the most tragic and shameful events of Miller's Academy. Numerous cadets lost their lives in this event. Jaehyun and his teammates were in the middle of this incident. In the end, only he survived from his team. Even after hearing several times that he should have been the one to die there, Jaehyun couldn't leave Miller's Academy, because he didn't want to disappoint his mother, nor the people who believed in him. After this, he goes to a shop, and buys some items he needed. Jaehyun wonders if he will have a different life this time. He couldn't protect anyone before and lived pathetically. He had a life as disposable as an item, but this time he doesn't plan to live like that again. Living with regret once was enough. After a day of theoretical classes, Kim Yoon, along with Ina, invites Jaehyun to go out together. She asks what they'll do tomorrow, saying it will be their first dungeon practice. Ina says she couldn't sleep well last night. Jaehyun says that everyone is feeling the same since it will be their first time entering a dungeon. Kim asks if it's his first time too and wonders if he's entered before just to look around. However, Jaehyun says he doesn't know much about dungeons, but he has seen some monsters before, so he feels more at ease. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.